Welcome to the Marsh Township Planning Board. You're here for our September 12th hearing. Legal notice required in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act has been satisfied, and a statement certifying same will be executed. Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to rise for a pledge of allegiance. Kathy, would you lead us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Some quick housekeeping. I ask everyone to please put your phone on mute or shut it off. And we're going to have 2 hearings tonight for applications, and we're going to have 2 resolutions that we're going to approve. So I ask that if anyone has questions, we'll give you direction on how you'll ask questions. And if you'll follow that, that would be great. We'll move the process along and get everybody home early enough tonight. So, Sonia, would you like to tee up the first resolution?
roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. That's most appropriate. I apologize.
Mr. Quillen? Ms. Van Order?
Present.
Ms. Murphy?
Here.
Ms. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Bai?
Here.
Mr. Flowers?
Here.
Mr. Alessa?
Here.
Mr. Slate?
Here.
Mr. Flynn sitting in for Mr. Warner?
Here.
Ms. Elizabeth Lady for Mr. Paul Phillips? Here. Joe Fishinger?
Here.
And I, Sonia Santiago, here.
I'm not sure. We'll leave that up to the IT guys.
Is that George?
It's George.
Oh, it says Paul Winters.
That's a different,
No, that's a different,
that's for somebody.
that's a different screen.
George, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, excellent. So you want to call his name?
She did already.
Did he say
Yep,
here?
I was first on the roll call.
Great. Good, Sonia, let's take the first resolution.
Mr. Flynn?
First resolution is Madison Avenue Urban Renewal LLC, Block 8409, Lot 1, 315 Madison Avenue. The description in the agenda: applicant proposes to redesign the facade of the new buildings, increase the number of restaurant seats, and remove the water wall from the outdoor patio with other related improvements. I believe Mr. Warner did draft this resolution and circulate it to our professionals. And I'm available for any questions about the resolution if the board members have.
So board members, are there any questions after you review the resolutions? Can I get a motion to approve? You get a second?
Second.
Sonia, would you like to call the roll?
Mr. Quillen?
Yes.
Ms. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Flowers?
Yes.
Ms. Van Order?
Yes.
So moved.
Next.
One more resolution on the agenda. Application 0522. It's for 284 Mendham LLC, Block 4501, Lot 4, 284 Mendham Road. Applicant proposes to subdivide the property to create one additional lot. A front yard variance is required for one of the lots as the existing setback to Mendham Road is deficient. The board members should have a draft of a resolution prepared by Mr. Warner that was also circulated to our professionals. And I'm available for any questions or comments.
Any questions from the board? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve?
I'll move that.
A second?
I'll second.
Sonia, roll call, please.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Bai?
Yes.
Mr. Flowers?
Yes.
Mr. Alessa?
Yes.
So moved.
Okay, let's take the first applicant. Please.
before we get started, let the record reflect that I did review the notice and the affidavits of service and publication. They were timely served and their contents were sufficient, so the board does have jurisdiction to act tonight.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was recused on this location. We're doing 299.
Yes, ma'am.
Madison.
Yes. Okay, very good, thank you.
I don't know, should I? Can't.
Should, Ms. Wilson is recused from this. Does she have the right to stay at the dais, or should she sit with the audience for now?
She's allowed to stay provided that she doesn't make any comment or opine in any way on the application.
The applicant is okay with that?
That's the recommendation of the legal counsel, then that's fine with the applicant.
Great. We'll move forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And so good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Anthony Todaro. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Faegre, Drinker, Biddle and Reith in Princeton, New Jersey. My office represents the applicant 299 Madison Avenue Fee Owner LLC. We are here tonight requesting preliminary and final major site plan approval and variance relief in order to allow for certain site improvements that are essential to the future use of the property. And so by way of brief background, the property is a approximately 5.3 acre corner lot with frontage on both Madison Avenue and Old Glen Road. It's located within the OL5 zoning district, and it is improved with a commercial building and parking lot with ancillary structures and improvements. The commercial building is approximately 57,000 square feet. The parking lot consists of 190 parking spaces. Most recently, it was utilized for medical offices, which is a permitted use in the OL5 zone. We are proposing to convert it, the use that is, from medical offices to a clinical laboratory, which is also a permitted use within the OL5 zone. And so with the anticipated use as a clinical laboratory, what we're proposing is to situate the generator and transformer pad in the front yard area adjacent to Madison Avenue. There will also be improvements to the rear of the property that will include a loading dock and a scissor lift that will be affixed to the existing structure. That will reduce the parking from the 190 existing spaces to 168. Then there will also be HVAC and other rooftop improvements that are going to be situated on there. And there will be rooftop coverage in excess of 20%. So we will be asking for variance relief in that regard as well. To further illustrate this proposal and to demonstrate both the applicant's ability to satisfy the positive and negative criteria for the required variance relief, we have Paul Winters, Bowman Engineering, who's going to go over the site plan and establish the conformity to the township site plan ordinance. And then we will have Sean Delaney, who will be providing our planning testimony tonight.
Great. I just, I apologize. I let you start very quickly, and I didn't make 2 housekeeping notes. So we're going to have a hard stop at 10 o'clock. We're going to give each applicant about an hour and 20 minutes to put on their testimony for this evening. So I apologize. I should have told you that in advance. That doesn't mean you need to talk quicker, but
No problem.
Just to
I'll
let
tell you
you
what, we'll shoot for the under.
okay, great.
All right. And so
So
absent
is
any,
Mr. Winters and your planner, or the planner here?
yes,
And is Mr. Winters here?
yes.
Oh, okay.
And so absent any questions from me, I would just ask that we would swear in our first witness.
Yeah, we'd like to qualify him first,
You want to qualify before you swear him in?
please.
That would be fine. Make sure you can hear me on the
Mr.
microphone.
Flynn, right? Flynn?
I usually swear in before qualifications
Okay.
because qualifications are part of his testimony.
Then why don't we do that?
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Why don't you provide the board with your qualifications?
Yes, I would be happy to. Let me just get situated here. Yes, my name is Paul Winters. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I have over 20 years' experience as a consulting engineer, and I've recently been qualified before this board earlier this year. I can give more detail, but I want to just point out I've been qualified before the board earlier this year.
He's previously been sworn and all of your licenses are current?
Yes, they are.
That's satisfactory, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Proceed with your testimony.
All right. As our representation's already given a little overview of the existing conditions, I'm going to put up an exhibit of that and talk briefly on those and then move on to a discussion of the proposed conditions for this application. I just need to connect to the municipal display so I can put these up. And that way they'll show up in chamber. Actually, I'm going to, where's our gentleman handling the IT this evening? Uh-oh, I lost him. Should I be sharing screen at this point, sir? With the Zoom connection as well? To make sure I get this correct.
If you're ready to display your exhibit, you
Ah.
can share your screen.
Oh, this is different than normal. Okay. I can go about it this way, but I need to share it through Zoom as well.
Yeah, you need to share
Okay.
it under Zoom once you bring it
Hold on.
up.
This is how it's hung out. Nope. Ah, there we go.
There's your shared envelope.
Okay, that is not what I expected. Well, it's not giving me that option.
So this is what you're trying to share here.
I'm trying to share the PDF.
which is-
Apologies for the technical difficulties. We're close. So that's the screen we want to share.
Right.
Oh, that's very strange.
Did you already, did you throw it up on the screen yet? Or did you do
Oh, I
that?
haven't done it for chamber. I can do that. I want to do that first. Oh.
Okay, yeah, that's where you can see it's already connected.
Mm-hmm.
You should be up on the screen.
Nothing, huh? All right, backup plan. Have these on a stick as well. Let's see if it'll get back in.
Takes a moment. There it goes. Okay, now it's on the screen. Part of it.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, while we're waiting for the technical difficulties, why don't I swear in our professionals now?
That'll be great. Thank you.
Can you both raise your right hand?
Here.
Do you both swear that any testimony you're about to give will be the whole
Okay,
truth,
good.
and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, we'll have all those there. I just don't know if it's sharing by the Zoom though.
Sworn in as well?
Unless
Is he gonna
the
provide
can see it.
I didn't review the
Yeah, you
first
could just verify
application.
that with
Be
anybody
happy
that's
for you to
on
swear
there.
me in anyway, but
Sure.
I doubt I'll have comments.
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the whole truth and nothing but the
I
truth?
do.
Sorry, I didn't see you back there.
That's all right. I'm not on the I didn't review the first application anyway.
No, we don't want to see that. We want to go back to there. Okay. Before proceeding, just want to ask if Board Member Quillen can see this from his location, because if he can, then I'll presume that anyone viewing via Zoom can see this.
I do not see it from my location. No, all I see is what I saw a few minutes ago, which is an image of the room and the seal of the Township of Morris and my own lovely image.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Quillen, you look great.
Thanks.
Possible to change the main image being broadcast out on that? Or is that just closer?
What do you mean?
Like what's being projected, we can't get that on the Zoom though.
Yeah, this is on the desktop.
I've got a backup plan. I have these on a stick.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I thought I would be able to, oddly enough.
You go to your share.
Did I lose them? There's
You still got it. If you go to your share.
those are my options.
Just quick share the screen. With the presentation. Quick share. Yeah, now bring the presentation. You should be good.
It says I'm screen sharing.
Okay, that worked for me.
Is that
Okay,
acceptable for you?
Let's proceed.
thank you for your patience, everybody. I will try and make up the time. This is an aerial exhibit showing the existing site outlined in red. This is noted as Block 8304, Lot 29.
Does that need to be marked as an exhibit? Or is that
Yes, this should be marked as an exhibit. Thank you. What number would we prefer for this exhibit?
A1's fine.
So Exhibit A1, existing conditions aerial plan.
Excuse me, Mr. Winter.
Yes, sir.
Can you maybe move, because we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you loud.
Better?
Better.
Okay.
Maybe people in the audience are also having trouble hearing.
All right. Thank you. Hopefully we're all settled in now then. Again, appreciate the patience here so we can get started. So as noted, we are a property located at the southerly corner of Madison Avenue and Old Glen Road. We are located in the OL5 Office and Research Lab District, and the total area of our property is 5.3 acres. We've already discussed from testimony from what Mr. Didaro's mentioned about the building specifics. So if the board pleases, I could go on to speak about the proposed conditions in the interest of time. And I have a separate exhibit for that purpose, which I'll bring up in a moment. But first, I want to say this application proposes to construct mainly minor site improvements to facilitate operations for a new tenant that will occupy this building. The tenant is Atlantic Health System, and the building will contain a centralized specimen biomedical laboratory with office space. This is
Paul, you could take the microphone off the thing.
I can try it. I'll just try and sit closer. That might be a little better. And sorry, thank you.
Would it be helpful if maybe we swap one of these, your mics out? Is that-
No, I made the recommendation they turn up the volume, so I think if they turn up the volume.
Okay, oh,
That's better.
now I'm very loud. Yes. All right. I'll try to work through it again. Thank you for your patience. The tenant is Atlantic Health System, and the building will contain a centralized specimen biomedical laboratory with office space. This is a permitted use in the OL5 zone. The size and floor area of the building will remain unchanged, though the building's HVAC and mechanical systems require upgrades to facilitate laboratory operations. Rooftop equipment will meet applicable height, setback, and screening requirements. However, we note that the total equipment area of the screened area will exceed 20% of rooftop area. Therefore, we could probably turn it down a touch. Therefore, variances are requested from two standards regarding rooftop appurtenances coverage, 95-3.4, 34.5 regarding coverage with all screened equipment areas, and 95-30B7 regarding coverage of rooftop appurtenances. We do have a plan that can clarify these areas, which was submitted with the application. I don't know if we need to assign an exhibit number to this, but this was submitted with the application just to illustrate the rooftop equipment coverage. The outer perimeter of the building is along this area here. And as you can see, inside of that square is a smaller square, which is the equipment enclosure that will screen the rooftop equipment from view. Now, the total screened area, which is applicable under one of the zoning parameters, works out to be 62.2% of the total roof area. However, as you can see from this image, that's not entirely equipment. That includes everything behind the screen, the equipment screen as defined in the ordinance. The actual equipment, as we calculated, it covers a little bit more than 20% of the roof, but in consideration of variations in equipment and ductwork and other elements, we would say we are not expected to exceed 30% of actual equipment coverage on the roof. We bring this up. The need for additional equipment really has to do with the particular use. This is a greater amount of equipment is necessary as laboratory use of this kind has a stricter temperature control tolerances than a typical office building, especially an office building of this age that we're occupying, which is necessary for proper storage and testing procedures. So that's the basis for why we're putting the additional equipment on the roof, which is the most suitable place to site this equipment. But I do want to reiterate that we meet all other rooftop equipment standards, including the minimum 15-foot setback for the screening, the maximum 15-foot height that's applicable. And we're providing screening that is aesthetically works with the architectural character of the building. So moving on from that, I would like to talk more now about the actual site improvements we're proposing with this application, as this really is the primary building change. I have an exhibit, which will need a number for. I presume this will be A2. A2 is the overall site improvement plan. This is a color rendering of our site plan combined with landscape elements that are proposed. Among minor improvements to the site that are proposed includes a new emergency generator and transformer, which are going to be located along the front of the building in this area here. These would support the essential laboratory functions. The generator itself is contained in a sound attenuating modular enclosure with approximate dimensions of 48 feet in length, 12 feet in width, and 13.8 feet in height. The generator will be mounted on a new concrete pad and will be natural gas fueled and will comply with applicable township standards for noise. We're proposing it in front of the building, which will require relief from the front yard setback requirement. This location was chosen as to best serve the proposed building, but also because this location is both most remote to residential areas on the site and also allows for the greatest opportunity to provide buffer planting around it to screen the view of the generator. As you can see on here, the site depicts rows of evergreen and dense deciduous plantings along the front and side of the generator in front of the building. In addition, I did have prepared another exhibit that shows this area to give a little perspective, and I think this is a good moment to introduce that because it speaks to two elements we've already discussed. So I'm going to introduce a third exhibit of this area. So this would be A-3.
Correct.
Titled Perspective Rendering. And what this rendering depicts is photos taken from two locations. One is from the westerly driveway from the perspective of Madison Avenue, that's in the top left corner, and one is of similarly from Madison Avenue from the easterly driveway, and that's in the top right corner. The top half of the exhibit shows the existing condition, and the bottom half shows a color rendering depicting the location of the generator and the landscape buffer planting in front of it. As you can see in the proposed condition, we've picked to delineate the location of the generator with these dashed white lines. And the reason for that is because if you look at that, you'll see that you do not see the generator because it is entirely behind the landscape buffering that we are proposing. We're proposing dense evergreens and things to help screen that view. When combined with existing landscaping, which will remain in front of the building, we think this will provide for an aesthetically pleasing view from the street, which will help supplement what's out there today as the area is landscaped. We do want to point out, we've also depicted in this exhibit a view of what the screening for the rooftop equipment looks like. And as you can see, that has setbacks on it, and that pops up above the height of the building. And again, that's also partly screened by existing plants along the front of the building. So moving on from these two improvements, we do have other minor site improvements, which I will switch back to our Exhibit A2 to discuss. So among other minor site improvements, we have an enlarged trash compactor enclosure on the east side of the parking lot, which is located in this area here. That is in approximately the same location as an existing trash enclosure on the site. However, since it is a little bit bigger to incorporate a compactor in that space, it's going to be closer to the side lot line, and therefore will need variance relief from the side yard setback for that structure. But again, it's generally in the same spot as the existing trash enclosure serving the site was. We're also going to be reconfiguring the loading area at the rear of the building, and that's this drive aisle in here, to better facilitate loading and unloading operations for the proposed use. This reconfiguration requires the removal of parking spaces in an area which will be replaced with some green space. We're actually going to put a planted island in that area, which will also help better separate employee parking from loading operations at the rear of the site. So that's a nice improvement for traffic flow. But other than that, traffic patterns will remain unchanged on the site. The driveways will remain unchanged on the site from the current condition. As a result of removing those parking spaces, however, to better facilitate loading and overall parking, we are going to end up reducing the total number of parking spaces on the site from the current 190 spaces to 168 spaces. The current requirement for a laboratory use is 191 spaces, so we are looking for a variance in support of providing fewer than the required number of parking spaces. I do want to note, and it was submitted by the applicant with the application, that the tenant's operations do not require more than a maximum of 150 parking spaces. So despite the variance request, this reduced parking count will be adequate to serve the tenant's needs moving forward. Among other things that were accommodated with these minor site changes, we're going to continue to provide the required ADA parking space count for the number of spaces proposed. And we're also going to be adding electric vehicle service equipment spaces for the charging of electric vehicles, which will be in accordance with the applicable standards for same. We're proposing 8 spaces in all to comply. They're in 2 areas. 4 spaces are provided in this corner and another 4 off of this parking area behind that new island that we're introducing to the plan. Among some other minor site improvements, we are replacing existing parking lot light fixtures to provide more efficient and uniform coverage. We're proposing LED lighting fixtures, which are dark sky compliant, which will be installed at the current fixture mounting heights, no higher than those. No additional light poles are proposed as a result of this, and the lighting is designed to meet the municipal standards. Beyond that, just want to note that most utility services will continue to serve the building. The existing ones will continue. We are installing new electric and gas to upgrade the existing for the proposed use. There's no requirement to make any changes to the stormwater management systems on site, as the existing conveyances and inlets will continue to serve the area since the changes are not substantial enough. The overall project actually results in a slight reduction in impervious cover, 0.03 acres. It's a reduction, so that's good. And our overall disturbance of the site is a little bit under 1/3 of an acre. So in all, we comply with applicable standards as we are for stormwater. So proposed site improvements also include a number of landscape improvements to the site, including planting of trees to comply with the township tree removal and replacement standards. And we're also providing, in addition to the plants along the front for the buffering of the generator, we are providing additional plantings to supplement existing vegetative screening along the Old Glen Road side, along this side of the site, as well as along the rear of the site. There's existing vegetation on those sides, and although most of the improvements in the rear half of the site really aren't changing, it was a parking lot before, it's going to continue to be a parking lot. We saw an opportunity to help plug some small gaps here and there in the existing screening on the Old Glen Road side, as well as to supplement an area that was a little less planted at this back corner of the building, just to overall improve the property and as a benefit to the neighbors.
Excuse me, Mr. Wicker,
Yes, sir.
can we ask you to pause for a second? We're all hearing some kind of a noise. Does anyone have their phone maybe on, or is this the radio to try and catch us talking? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Wicker.
With that brief pause, I did want to ask if I was being heard okay, but I was kind of on a roll, so I didn't want to stop. So I hope, and if we missed anything,
Everybody can hear?
if we miss anything, I know there'll be an opportunity for questions. Let me see then. Almost through the main part here. Good.
He just left.
At this point, I do want to touch on a summary of variances. We do have a planner who'll be providing testimony to these, but I just want to give a brief summary. Some of these I've mentioned already. We are seeking relief from the following ordinance standards. Minimum front yard setback to building or accessory building. There's a 100-foot setback requirement. The existing, excuse me, the existing building setback is slightly deficient of that. It's an existing 98.6 feet. The construction of the generator as an accessory structure will be coming in at 82.3 foot setback, which is what a variance is being requested for in this instance. There's a minimum front yard setback to parking requirement of 100 feet. From Old Glen Road, there's an existing distance of 67.5 feet from the property line to existing parking and circulation area. We're not proposing any additional parking or encroachment. We're simply proposing restriping and installing the EV parking components to parking that falls within that setback now. So we're incorporating that as a variance request just to be thorough with that. I mentioned earlier we would need a minimum side yard setback to a building or accessory building. This is for the trash enclosure proposed along the east property line. It's a fenced trash enclosure, but we're treating it as an accessory structure for the sake of that variance, again, to be thorough. That's a 16.7 foot side yard setback where a 75 foot setback is required. I mentioned needing relief from the condition for a maximum aggregate area of rooftop appurtenance coverages of 20%, which we are going to be exceeding and need a variance for. And lastly, a variance for providing less parking spaces than the requirement. 168 are proposed, where 191 are required. And again, planner testimony will be provided in regards to those matters shortly. We have received some letters from the municipality, including the TCC report from July 7th, as well as the environmental committee report from August 5th of this year. I believe we have, through a revised submission, already addressed most of the comments of the TCC report. I'd be happy to go through any that we feel need to. Most of them involved resubmission, clarification of matters, including the side yard setback and providing the rooftop equipment plan, and demonstrating compliance with the ordinances, which we either have or will through our planning testimony. One item in particular that I'll touch on is item 6 from the TCC report, which wanted to ensure we would install landscape screening of a suitable height to be consistent with the generator height in the front. We will be happy to make that adjustment to ensure that we provide the screening for that. So that is a condition we will be happy to meet.
Can you confirm whether they will be native species?
Oh, yes, thank you. I apologize. I had a note about that. And I wanted to ensure, oh, that's actually coming up. Thank you. You're a step ahead of me. That's fine though. The environmental report had 4 comments, which I can address at this time if the board so wishes, just to demonstrate we will comply.
And for item 3 in the TCC,
Yes, sir.
fully compliant on height? They
Yes.
mentioned- Okay.
Yes, we're meeting the height requirement for rooftop appurtenances. Yes. Regarding the environmental report, item 1, which requested we provide landscape screening of the generator, and also spoke about the species of plants. Briefly on that, plant species are selected to serve the intended purpose of providing screening and buffer, and as such, the majority of those are going to be native species that are proposed throughout the site. There are a few non-native evergreen species necessary since there are a few native evergreens that can provide the dense screening desirable in some instances, but we've maximized the use of native plants, and we have avoided using, and we do not use any of the plants on the New Jersey invasive species do not plant list. So we addressed those conditions. Item 2 from the environmental letter. Asked about provision of additional planting along the Old Glen Road, screening and vegetation, which we are providing as part of this application that will supplement the existing to improve the view from that perspective. Item 3, ask that rooftop equipment comply with applicable noise regulations, which it shall. And item 4, ask that we provide EVSE, electric vehicle charging equipment to comply with applicable requirements, and we are providing that. So with that established, I believe this completes my direct testimony on the site conditions.
Yes, just briefly, can you just, thank you. Can you just address any additional credits or otherwise bonuses that the applicant would be able to take for the EV parking spaces?
Yes, yes. As a point of clarification, the legislation that the state passed allows the counting of electric vehicle parking spaces twice towards your parking count. As noted in our variance, we are not identifying that number in the variance request. We're actually providing the actual number of parking spaces of 168. We do note that with the credit for those 8 spaces, it would be 176, but we provided it both ways for the board's benefit since the legislation is new and we're all getting accustomed to it.
Technically with credits.
176. It would be 8 credits plus the 168. So we'd be 176 with the credits. So we could look at it as a relief from that, but practically speaking, it's 168 parking spaces. Anything?
And that concludes our direct.
I'm going to open up questions now to our board members. I'll start at the left of me.
I just had a quick clarifying question, and that is regarding the the enlarged trash enclosure where you're asking for a variance for side yard setback. You stated that 70 feet is required and you're providing 16 feet approximately. Is that what you had testified?
75 feet is the requirement, and we're providing 16.7 feet. And the requirement is the same whether it's for principal or accessory structures, and we are we're viewing the fenced trash enclosure as an accessory structure in this interpretation.
Thanks for the clarification.
Well, I don't know if this is the correct time for this question, but on the TCC report, it asked for you to give, I guess, more reasoning on why the proposed generator has to be located in the front yard. You gave some reasons for that, but I'm curious why those reasons wouldn't also point to just locating it on the eastern side of the property, not in front of the building. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I can. We did look at options of locating the generator. One of the considerations, there's 2 main considerations that came into that. One of them was the view of the generator and buffering the view. The area we have available on the right side, if the generator can be fit in that area, there's far less space to provide buffer planting in front of or around it. So we can do a more thorough job of buffering it when it's in front of the building. Now, either way, we would be looking at a potential variance because we would be within the side yard setback on the side. But it seemed like we had a superior option to provide more buffering on the front of the building. Practically, it also helps hide the generator in the massing of the overall building. I mean, if I can go back to Exhibit 03 for a moment, and since we have the benefit of doing this, I could zoom in a little bit. And you can see this, the building today is a box effectively, it's rectangular. And we're putting a much smaller box in front of it. So between having it in front of the existing building and having the buffering, and perhaps the view over here would help as well. We feel it's going to blend in very well here and be less obvious than if we were to say in this area here, stick something brand new up. There's also a third consideration, which is a little more, has a little more weight than that. And that was our desire to ensure that we minimize or maximize rather sound attenuation, keeping with the applicable sound requirements at the property line. This location in the front, and I'll go back to our overall exhibit A2 for a moment. This location in the front is farther away from the side property line than if we have it over here. So those are some reasons I went into the selection of this location. We understand it's a relief either way, but that's the basis of reasons why.
What about cost? Did that factor in?
I know I never asked the question, of course. Practically, I didn't, I'll be honest. I don't believe it would be a significant cost differential. I think it's a one or the other, but regardless, I think I didn't look at that as a reason for doing one or the other. It was really for the aesthetic and establishing something that would work for this particular site.
In the rendering, that height that's shown, that is 13 feet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's 13 feet. I'll put the
Okay.
rendering back up for a second.
Thank you.
And can we just identify the,
You gotta get it closer.
okay. And you're just going to identify the rendering.
Oh, yes.
We're going to put that back up.
That's, again, that was exhibit 8-3, the rendering.
Okay, thank you. Skip over me, I'll go last. Mr. Biden?
Okay, yeah, couple questions. One, I appreciate the renderings. That's always helpful when you're looking at that. However, is there a mistake in this? According to the landscape plan, that large tree from the picture in the lower right, the large tree just to the left of the enclosure is one that's shown as being removed. That's right where the transformer pad is being, or am I looking at that wrong?
Are you looking at the bottom left or the bottom right?
The bottom left. I'm sorry, bottom right picture. There. That tree, the tree in front of the enclosure to the far left, just to the left of the generator. I believe that tree is shown on the landscape, and the cut plan is one of the trees, one of the specimen trees that's going to be cut.
There are two trees in the front which are going to need to be removed in order to locate the generator here. We are proposing an adequate number of replacement trees to meet the applicable standard. In preparing this rendering, it was easy to show the new buffering. It was a little more challenging to intricately remove a tree, and I wouldn't want to put forth an exhibit that looked like it was crafted. I would rather just deal with it as it is, especially since the trees really are not relevant to the buffering of the generator. Their canopies are up high. We're down at ground level. So that's a very astute observation. Thank you. But we were unable to make this depict what it would be without that tree, but again, not relevant to the generator buffering part of it.
Well, but it is relevant to the view from the street.
That is true. Yes.
I mean, there's two large trees there that won't be there that are shown in the picture. Okay. And one of the reasons I bring that up is part of the visioning exercise for Madison Avenue. You know, those large setbacks from Madison Avenue were one of the things that's very much prized by the residents. So this does affect that. I just want to clarify, you said this shows the buffering at the height of the generator, right? And you agree that that would be, because the landscape plan shows planting 8 to 10 foot high.
Yes,
that you will stipulate that
the landscape plan, we did not make an update to that following the TCC meeting. We are going to make that change as part of the conditions of any approval that may be granted for this. So
Okay.
we have no problem with making that change, but we felt we would present it with it in this exhibit that way.
Another question on the trash enclosure on the side. That basically replaces what's there now, right? Which you haven't, there's an enclosure there now.
That is correct.
This is just a little bit larger and shifted slightly, but
Yes.
so you say there's the setback, you're asking for variance, the setback of only 6.7 feet, but it's like 8 feet now at most, I would guess.
The existing enclosure, I measured it is 28 feet wide by 14 feet deep, because we're looking to put a compactor for recyclables and other materials in there. We needed to double that depth, so it's a 28 by 28 structure. So we're getting 14 feet closer to that side lot line. One thing I do want to note, we are moving this a little bit further from the rear lot line, in part because there were some trees in that area we had the opportunity to not conflict with. So since we're on the topic of trees, I wanted to note that.
Back to the generator for a minute. It says natural gas, so we know there's no diesel storage issues. How about the noise and the testing, you know, when testing for that goes on?
Testing for generators of this size is typically not more than twice a month. Those can be scheduled during daytime hours. We're not opposed to that being a condition of any approval regarding sound. Obviously, the sound standards apply to the testing operations. So yes, that would be daytime hours and only on the frequency necessary for testing, which is usually less than a half an hour, sometimes as little as 15 minutes per operation.
And on lighting, it's kind of the same question. What are the hours of operation of the lighting you foresee?
The lighting, we can speak to that a little bit. There is a need to have lighting during the evening hours. In speaking with the tenant, we're willing to look into maybe doing some dimming or timers on those if there's a preference under the ordinance or the board to see us limit that, or provide some kind of controls. We're certainly amenable to that. But there can be lighting that would need to be on for most of the night on at least the part of the site nearest to the building.
On part of what?
The part of the site nearest to the building.
Okay. Yeah, okay, but not necessarily in the far reaches, the southern end of the parking lot. We could.
I think the rear of the property is an area we could look at doing reduced lighting or a lighting on a timing basis, as long as we're providing appropriate enough lighting for security and safety purposes on enough of the property.
Because, well, what are the hours? I'm assuming the lab pretty much operates around the clock.
The laboratory does have options to operate around the clock. Most of operations are daytime hours. There are some evening hours. They do have the capability and need. It's based upon demand of testing specimens, as it's a medical testing facility, and there's time sensitivities to that. And that's a reason why they would need some amount of lighting on for at least a portion of the site, the front half, during nighttime hours. And we'd be amenable to controls or other techniques to minimize spillage. Regarding that, again, I do want to point out we are supplementing the buffering around the site again to try and really to try and be good neighbors on this, try and make this as appealing and low impacting as possible.
Okay, thank you. No more
Thank you.
Thank you. I was a little bit confused about your discussion on roof coverage. The maximum coverage permitted is 20%. And I thought you said with the changes it would now be 30%, but the document that was submitted indicates with equipment coverage only, which includes an existing penthouse. So I don't know what that is actually, but that the coverage would end up being over 20%. So it's 21.4. And then your next statement says, including this existing penthouse and all areas behind screening, the coverage is actually 62.2%. So can you just elaborate a little bit? I may have misheard you when you were speaking earlier, but the 20% coverage is permitted. There's an existing penthouse and you're adding some proposed equipment that without the screening is 21 and change, and with the screening is 62 and change, according to this document.
That's a good question. There are a bunch of numbers involved with the rooftop coverage calculation. The relief we're seeking follows the more conservative number under section 95-34.5, section A1, which stipulates aggregate area of rooftop appurtenances, including all areas within a screen or enclosure, shall not exceed 20% of the total area of the roof surface. So if we count everything inside of the screen, that's where the basis for the 62.2% number came from. That number was included in the application.
So that's the accurate number.
That's relevant to the variance request. Regarding the other numbers, I just wanted to put into perspective how much actual equipment we might have on the roof. It's less than what's behind the screening.
Right.
Just to provide the understanding to the board.
Okay, so two related questions, if I may.
Yes.
With all this existing coverage on the roof, are there any issues with the roof structure and its ability to carry the weight of what you're putting there?
That was all reviewed by structural engineers already. In fact, the screening or the grading that you saw in the equipment enclosed area is the dunnage or the platform which they install on the roof to carry and distribute the load from that equipment. So that's been taken into account.
Okay, and then a final question. I see on the exhibit that you had it before that you had a screen. It didn't look like you could see the mechanicals from the road. Is that the case? That the screening is going to be high enough that you're not going to see the mechanical?
That's correct. The screening will be high enough. 15 feet is our maximum height. Let me see if I can find that exhibit. 15 feet is our maximum permitted height above the roof, which will comply with for the screening and all equipment.
Okay.
And that'll screen everything with that equipment screen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Quillen.
Mr. Chairman, were you speaking to me? I can't hear you when you speak particularly well.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we're looking to see if you have any questions for this applicant.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I had some questions about the rooftop as well. Can you tell me, so it sounds like you're not sure how tall the screen will be, but the maximum height will be 15 feet because that's the maximum that's permitted. Is that right?
We're going to meet the maximum height. The screen will be 15 feet above the top of the roof.
Okay, and then with a 15-foot screen on top of the roof, what will be the overall height of the building?
I'd have to look and see the way the definition is written. The screening is relevant to the appurtenances, but the existing height of the building is well under the permitted height. 37.5 feet is what we have on record for the building.
What's the permitted height?
So we'll be the screen itself will be 15 feet above that, but the screen height is permissible under certain exceptions under the height portion of the ordinance.
Certain exceptions. Good. Can you elaborate? I'm just not sure. I'm not putting together all the pieces. So there's a maximum height permitted for buildings. Do you know what that maximum height is?
45. Maximum height in
It's 45 feet.
45 feet. I just wanted to double check. Thank you. 45 feet is the maximum permitted building height. Yes.
And the building is now 30 something feet high, did you say?
37.5 feet high.
And the screen will be 15 feet.
The existing building today is 37.5 feet in height from ground to top of the roof.
With the screen, it will exceed 45 feet, but you're saying there's some exception for rooftop screening to the maximum height limitation?
Yes, can I just step in?
Oh, absolutely. I was just going to.
All right, all right, section 9530 in the ordinance permits certain rooftop appurtenances such as you have here to be excluded from the height calculations up to a maximum of 15 feet. So it's not, it's not 37 plus 15. 15 is excluded. But if they were to go higher than 15, then it would become part of the building height.
Okay, great. Thank you. I also have a question, and this maybe is more to satisfy my own curiosity than anything else. But I have a question about the reason for a limitation on rooftop coverage for mechanical equipment, whether that is something that's just for appearance sake. If you happen to know, comparing this to other towns or your experience otherwise, what would be the reason that a town like ours would want to limit the coverage of mechanicals on a rooftop?
Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Quillen, is that a question for our planner? Is that a rhetorical question or is that a question for the applicant?
I was asking the applicant's engineer if he's willing to answer. Otherwise, I could ask our planner.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was waiting for a clarification where the where Mr. Quillen wanted the answer to come from. From my experience, I can't pinpoint a particular rationale for it. I would think noise may be a consideration as to why they may limit the equipment on the roof. In that regard, one benefit is we're putting all new equipment on the roof, which tends to be better sound attenuated than older equipment. But again, we are complying with the provisions to put the rooftop equipment in here.
And we have a noise ordinance, which you'll be, you're not asking for any variance there, right?
That's correct. No variance requested from the noise ordinance.
In terms of the usage of the building, there'll be a single tenant, that's Atlantic Health. And that's the expectation. I wanted to ask whether there's any expectation that the public would be coming to this building.
There's no public coming to this building. There's no patients. This is not a medical facility with patients. It's a laboratory testing type of facility, only employees.
Okay. I was looking at the signage that you had in your plan, and it didn't seem like there were any signs directing anyone to the building. So that was my belief, was that this was not for the public. Finally, I'm curious about the scissors lift. It's in the center of the rear of the building. What is that going to be used for?
The scissors lift allows for loading and unloading in absence of having an actual loading dock. So that way they'll have the ability to unload a truck that might not have a loading or unloading dock on the back of it. It's a less intrusive means of providing for that capability.
So it's right next, it would be right next to an opening in the building?
It is,
I thought it was set away from the building a bit.
I'm going to zoom into Exhibit A2 just to show you. We're actually situating it here opposite the main loading doors here, which will generally be at grade. So if a vehicle comes in here and needs to use that, then whatever's being unloaded could be brought right across the loading aisle. So that's the purpose and the location for that.
I have a little trouble visualizing how that will be used, but it's obviously been thought through, and it doesn't seem like something which we should be objecting to or really particularly commenting on. All right, I had a few other questions, but they were already covered by other board members. So that was it. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Quillen. So I have a couple of questions. I want to jump back to Mr. Flowers' question because I'd like you to elaborate. I'm not really satisfied. I'm trying to understand. It also goes back to Mr. Bai's comment about the visioning for Madison Avenue. And I'm trying to get my arms around why the generator. So the question is would you consider relocating the generator to the side of the building? Possibly you have this trash compactor that looks quite large. I'm wondering, since we may give you variance relief on the size of the trash compactor, we might also give you the same relief on the side of the building that we might not want to give you on the front of the building. So I'm asking you, the question is, would you consider relocating it?
Our biggest, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to defer to you.
Our biggest concern with going with the side for that location, if we're looking in this area or any area of that side here,
Yes, sir.
really turns into a matter of meeting the noise requirement. These kind of enclosures are rated to meet the 65 decibel threshold, which is what we're supposed to be at our property lines. At 50 feet, we'd be closer than 50 feet, so we would need further relief from that kind of a standard. It's preferred, of course, not to seek noise relief because noise is a sensitive issue. Whereas in the front, we certainly meet that noise requirement. And to compensate for it being here, that's why we're proposing all the landscaping. So that seemed to be a rational basis for saying, well, we can get planting here, but if we're that close to the property line, we can't make the sound a lot better.
Right, but the landscaping is taking away from what I call the streetscape of the building. So yes, you've landscaped it and hidden it very well, but you've also taken away the fact that the building, and I'm commenting and I shouldn't do that. That's not really a question. My question was why you would you consider moving it to the side? I didn't hear whether you said no or yes.
I'd say there'd probably be a discussion apart from our application. What's here tonight is we're proposing in this location, because
Okay.
it's twofold. It would necessitate additional variances and deviations. Those would be more cumbersome because it would be noise. And number two is while it is located in a front yard area, we're situated in a location that we're trying to make it as far away from the residential properties as possible as well.
So moving it maybe 40 feet if I'm standing in front of the building left, and 20 feet or 30 feet back, which resident is affected by that? Is it the Crum and Forster building?
Where?
Well, if we move it to I'm sorry, could you describe that location again, just so I can make sure I'm clear?
Yeah, it's the location that you're looking at. It's the 2 parking spots or the land beyond the 2 parking spots on the side of
Around
the
in
building.
here?
Yeah. And why couldn't you sound attenuate the structure with some sound barriers around them instead of landscaping to block the noise? And thereby, you're probably going to affect a couple of homeowners as opposed to most of the people that drive up and down Madison Avenue.
It seems like a whole lot of improvements that we would essentially be reconfiguring the site at that point.
Okay. It's just a yes or no answer.
Not so. I mean, we could ask, but I don't see that as I don't see that as a feasible option.
Okay, I'll ask some other questions.
And there's also planning testimony that maybe it might be able to help assist in that regard too.
Great. So I'm going to ask Mr. Slate, I'm looking at the location for the new loading zone or the reconfigured island. Just want to make, are you comfortable that a tractor trailer can make that maneuver in and make that maneuver out? It looks a little tight when they come out along the, again, I'm looking at it upside down, the right side of the building from Madison Avenue.
I think there's, sufficient space there. That, one parking spot may be tight, but they are opening up the radius and, that is a wider than usual drive aisle there. So I don't anticipate there being a problem with trucks maneuvering in that area.
And just clarify for me, so you guys were here a couple of months ago for additional parking spots. Those parking spots are now off the table. You're looking at the existing survey?
That was the prior owner. They were asking for there was a separate application, obviously, and they were requesting additional parking, correct?
But you're back to the original plan as it is now,
Original
as
plan.
far as the existing parking. You're working off
Well,
the survey is
correct. We're
what it
working
looks
off of
like today
Yes,
versus what it looked like, what it could look like if they added the parking.
correct.
Right. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I have no other questions. We're going to move on to our board professionals. Mr. Slate?
Question for the applicant. Is the applicant willing to add a note to the plans that if any house side shields are necessary for the lighting, that they would add them to the lights as required?
Yes, we would do that.
And I did note that the tree size that's proposed is 2 to 2.5. Our minimum replacement tree caliper is 2.5. Is the applicant willing to stipulate to a minimum replacement tree of 2.5-inch caliper?
Yes.
And I would also note that, it may be possible for for some other type of sound attenuation, but this board, in my opinion, and Mr. Flynn can elaborate on this if it's necessary, that this board doesn't have the jurisdiction to grant a variance for sound attenuation. If they can't meet the sound limit at the property line, the township's noise ordinance mimics NJDEP's noise limits. So, it would require some additional type of sound attenuation if it was located in that area. Just want to make that clear to the board. And, question for the applicant, are there any signage changes proposed or there be some re-signage or refacing of the existing signage? Is that all that's proposed at this point in time?
Yeah. If anything, there's an existing freestanding sign at the front entrance, just refacing or changing the panels and that, if anything, but nothing new or additional.
And the last thing that I had is that if the board is to grant an approval on this, we need just some more direction on that nighttime lighting issue. As far as the time limit that it would go down to, security lighting, that sort of issue. But no further questions at this point.
Yes.
Yes, I have just, you're changing the use. I understand that it is a permitted use, but it's a lab type. Sorry, I have to face away from it. It's a lab type use. And I was curious if there are any specific waste handling provisions with regard to it being a lab use rather than just more of an office use.
Yes, there are. For any medical related waste that might be a product of the testing, they have a licensed service that would handle that. Those are wastes that are not stored external to the building. They're stored inside the building. The outside enclosure is only for regular commercial type trash and recycling.
And do you have any sense of what days of the week or how often that interior trash would be, or waste would be removed?
They're going to be using a private hauler for this. I think it's in the 2 to 3 times per week. It'll be as needed, but that's the ballpark right now. They're looking at up to 3 pickups per week.
And then what about with your trash removal? What days and what times?
I do not know if we have specifics on
I mean,
actual dates yet.
how many days?
That's what I meant, the 2 to 3 days. That was for trash.
That was trash. Okay, I'm talking about the interior,
the interior.
medical waste. Or sorry, whatever it is, lab waste.
Lab waste would be daily. With the frequency of that, it's a smaller vehicle pickup. So.
Okay, thank you. Those are my only questions.
Mr. Fissinger, I know you said that you hadn't reviewed anything, but I don't want to exclude you.
I don't, excuse me, I don't have any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. So we're going to now take questions from the public. We have a microphone over here. I'd ask you to step up to the microphone, give us your name, your address, and this is for questions only, no comments, no opinions, just questions.
And Mr.
And
Chair,
it's questions for this witness.
Okay,
That's
my
my
name is
question.
Barbara Sellinger. I live at 2 Old Glen Road, the property abutting 299 Madison. Couple of questions because I'm totally confused now with respect to the trash compactor. Is that for only recyclable? Is there any waste that animals are going to come and visit for? And how noisy will it be? Because again, we had some stuff going on during the day that made a lot of noise. So there is a concern about noise. And is it the noise just with respect to the trash compactor going on its own, or the load, what do we call it, the lift going on its own, and the generator going on its own? Or when it is tested for noise level, what about when they're all running at the same time? Because when they do some work there, in all honesty, I can be in my house and can't even talk to my husband because we can't hear each other. So we have to go on the other side of the house. My house is 9,000 square feet. I know. So I'm asking, I apologize. So I'm trying to
Yes.
get clarification on noise.
Just to clarify, it's the compactor is for cardboard only. There is no trash with the compactor. The trash will be in a regular dumpster in the enclosure. That would only be operated during daytime hours of business. What else do we have to touch in there? And as far as other equipment, the generator exercises are relatively infrequent, a couple times a month at most. So all in all, it's a number of infrequent operations with these kind of things.
And what about the lift?
The lift is only going to facilitate loading as needed. It's a very small lift. I think it's less than 10 by 10. It's very small. It's a hydraulic lift. So it's not going to be it's hydraulic motors. It's not very noisy.
Okay. And with respect to the frontage on Old Glen Road, and we're talking about 67-foot setback change or whatever, would that change or not change? Because we're not changing the parking lot.
No, we're
Would
not
that still
changing.
keep the green area the same
Yes.
size as the green area currently is?
Yes, and just because this question may come up, the chairman mentioned, or one of the board members did mention about relevant to the prior application. The prior application earlier this year, I understand, had a number of parking spaces being added to the perimeter of the site. That's not part of this present application before the board.
So no movement at all with the green?
No.
Great. Those are my questions.
Hi, Amy Merle, 3 Old Glen Road, and I live directly across the street from where the forklift and loading dock is going to be. So my question is there any other possibility other than having that where it is? Because I will hear, and for the past 3 days, as Barbara mentioned, and we're not allowed to talk about it, but I had to work in the back of my house also. So even though it may be infrequent or hydraulic or whatever you're saying, it is still a forklift, a scissor lift, a loading dock for a building. And I did notice there's a side entrance to the building on the other side. See, if you look on the left.
Yeah, you're providing comment.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So is it possible to put things on the other side where there are no houses, where it's just businesses? That's my question. And the other question is, the scissor lift that you were talking about and the loading dock, what besides using the scissor lift, what else would be loaded on that loading dock? And how often would that loading dock be used?
Regarding the location, we did look at options of where to put the loading zone with traffic circulation and the configuration of the building. This ended up being the best location for that. Unfortunately, we were not able to make it work on the right side of the building. But I do want to reiterate, this is a very small lift, which is going to be infrequently used. It's hydraulic for anything that's large enough to come off a bigger sized truck that needs to come up and down. This is not a high volume operation. This is nothing like you might think of when you hear the term loading dock. Again, it will be very infrequent compared to, I think if we have 1 delivery or 2 a day, it would be a lot based upon my discussion with the applicant.
Okay.
And again, it's a hydraulic motor. It's not mechanized. There's no, they'll use manual lifts to get things into the building with this. I want to emphasize it's a small operation. I understand your concern, but I just want to emphasize it as a small operation.
Okay, and I have a question about visually. I know you're talking about, 2-foot trees or whatever, but the loading dock, I don't know how high it is. I don't know how high the scissor lift is. As I mentioned, I live right there. So it's in my face.
The loading dock it's actually not a dock. It's really just a concrete platform off the back. The scissors lift is there instead of an actual dock.
I don't have any other questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to also, while we're on the topic of that, we are providing the additional planting, which is really going to be in the 3 to 4 foot height range along the Old Glen Road side of the property, which we feel is, and we located it intentionally to fill any gaps that might be from view of the Old Glen Road side. I walked it myself to see where those were so we could best implement the plants on that side. So we'll be supplementing that buffer on that side.
Oksana Yatsu, 5 Old Glen. Question about equipment, YATSIV. My first name, OKSANA.
Thank you.
Question is about
And your
the roof,
address?
5 Old Glen.
Thank you.
So the question is about the rooftop equipment. How many pieces of that equipment and what kind of equipment?
The equipment is mostly going to be, I think there's 2 new air handlers. I'm actually going to pull it up. I might as well speak to it. There's 2 larger air handler units to move air through the HVA system. There's an existing cooling tower for the cooling of the system. There's a number of exhaust fans. By my count, at least 6 on here. There'll be ductwork. That's the bulk of it's all related to the HVAC of the building. And again, just, I know I've mentioned it, but I'll mention again, it's enclosed in the screening area, and we're not filling the entire rooftop with equipment. It's a smaller area than we're requesting relief from.
You also mentioned that it's going to be loud, right? Or it's
No, it's going to comply with the sound requirements. So no.
okay. So now let me ask you about, if you go back to the plan you have one more question about the compactor, trash compactor. How loud that thing is and how many times per day they're going to use it.
That's going to be used only during daytime hours. And again, it's just for cardboard. So it's only with the frequency they need to.
So that's a paper and plastic or just paper?
Just paper, just cardboard
paper.
and paperboard, yes.
Okay. Now let me ask you one more question about the screening, additional screening on Old Glen. What kind of screening that is?
It's a mixture of evergreen shrubs as well as some denser deciduous shrubs that were selected specifically to improve, really to increase and enhance the buffer at the 3 to 4 to 5 foot height. Right now, if you walk, and you know Old Glen Road because you live there, up high, there's a lot of tree canopy, but down low, there's some gaps. So we're looking to fill in some of those gaps and help improve that buffer in that area with these additional plantings.
Got it. Thank you. Now, one more question about, we were talking about the previous owner and the previous basically plan you had in plan or whatever that was before. So is that still legal, or that's because the older, whatever, the owner is not legal at this point, the plan is not legal, or will they be able to use that plan somehow in the future because it was already approved in a way? So what happens to that plan?
You know,
Is it ever,
it might make most sense for Mr. Flynn to answer that question.
Sure.
will that be ever legal to use that plan? Since it's-
So
application was not granted, and it's
oh,
not.
it was granted.
It was granted.
It was granted.
But
This would supersede.
right. So, so the question for the applicant then is that whatever parking changes they made in the application that was previously approved, those are being abandoned as a result of these?
They had approval for banked spots to accommodate the medical office use. We are proposing to convert that use to a laboratory, and we do not need the 190 existing spaces. But I do want to note, however, that part of the landscaping to help buffer those additional parking spaces at the prior application was that buffer along Old Glen Road that we wanted to keep just as an added benefit to the residents.
Okay, so can you just summarize
Even though-
for the member of the public, the difference between from a parking perspective, the difference between the application, I didn't handle the application, I apologize to the members of the board. The difference from the parking from the application that was previously approved from the prior owner to what's being proposed now, just a quick summary.
They were granted variance relief for certain setback requirements to add additional parking. The difference here is that we aren't requesting that additional parking. We're actually requesting a variance for a reduced parking count.
I'm satisfied with that.
I don't know if that
I'm
answers
still
your
not
question.
clear if that old plan, if somebody wants, will they be able to use it or not? If not, then just answer clearly, no, they will not. If yes, possibly.
This application, if granted, would supersede any prior approvals on the property.
So in that case, that will be negated totally.
I wouldn't use the word negated. I would just say that this application would govern the current standard of the property, if granted.
Well, then negate it.
I mean,
The applicant would
What is
still
the-
have the ability to build
Right.
that parking, correct?
That's correct.
right, it would still be vested. Right.
So the answer is that approval stands and could be built.
Okay. That answers my question. will, or can somebody or somehow can that be negated in a way? Or what needs to happen so that all plan is basically crossed?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, the applicant's here for their own, for a new.
Right, but then that applicant in 2 months might say, so I already have this approval, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install that water retention basin. I'm going to go and expand that parking lot. I'm going to go and cut all those trees. I'm going to go in addition to what we are going to grant it today, which basically the answer was yes, they can do that.
If they I mean, you're not withdrawing your application.
I-
I'm not sure how to address the question. Either it would be governed by what's applied for today, or if the board were to, if the applicant were to withdraw or the board were to
Yes.
deny, it would be based on whatever the prior approval of the property is.
Well, but can they basically withdraw the previous one?
No, because they already received their approvals.
If it's to a
Anybody there?
benefit to this discussion, I do want to offer one point about the tenant that's coming in. They have a long-term lease, so the use we're seeking, the minor site improvements we're seeking tonight would be serving them for the life of their lease, and it's 15-year lease. So this is satisfying what they need on the site. So maybe that gives some comfort on what's going to come on the site for the near future.
Can I make a comment? We have 8:24. We started at 7:15. I added 5 minutes for the technical difficulties. That's going to bring you to 8:40, which is basically 16 minutes. Do you think if we wrapped up this question, you could get your planner and all of our questions in 16 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll proceed.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
I have a question. Patricia Collins, 4 Green Knolls Road. I don't live in that area. I live near Friendly's, but I've lived in the neighborhood for 50 years. And when you said, sir, my question is that this is the best option. I don't understand why you can't make it work to move everything away from the houses and by the office buildings. You can make anything work if you want to. And why aren't you doing that?
Is that really a technical question, Mr. Flynn?
I mean, he basically, they're asking a technical question about I'm assuming the noise regulations. I mean,
Yeah.
The testimony has been that they configured the site and they presented the application to the board based upon what they think best mitigates any issues with the noise regulations. And I'm not sure that any additional elaboration is really.
Yeah, so ma'am, I think to answer your question, maybe I'm going out on a limb here. We asked that question. We asked them to consider relocating it. We asked them why they didn't consider it. They gave us reasons. It'll be up to the board to decide whether they accept those reasons to grant or not grant approval. We asked them if they would consider relocating, and they, at this moment, said no.
But, right, and I know I can't comment, but why can't you really physically do it? Because you can do anything in engineering terms, whatever you have space. Take a few parking spots away, but move that away from the people. And
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
I think you got your point across, although
Good. I want to see my
maybe
point.
the question wasn't answered asked properly. Do we have any other questions from the public? So seeing none, we're going to close the public questioning on this witness. We're at 8:26. Certainly, we'll give you a few minutes leeway, but recognize the fact that you're going to be questioned, and then the board's going to need to deliberate before it gives a decision.
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do,
And can you just state your name, address, and credentials for the board?
certainly. My name is Sean Delaney. I'm a principal with Bowman Consulting, located in our Freehold office. I'm a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. Have been licensed since 2008, have appeared before several planning and zoning boards giving variance testimony. and I was accepted previously by this board on the prior application that was discussed with the parking expansions several months ago. And I am a licensed planner, yes, and my license is in good standing.
I'd like to admit him as an expert. You have a plan? I did. So qualified? Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
So as was discussed, we have, I understand there are about a total of 9 variances being requested as part of this application. 4 of them are existing conditions related to the property, with 5 new ones being proposed. I believe both of these, of all the variances, are all covered and justified under both the C1 and C2 criteria. And I will explain those further as I go through each one of the variances requested. Starting with the existing variances, that are existing conditions. We have the lot width variance that was requested. 400 feet is required where 367.7 is existing. It's something we can't change. I believe that's covered under the C1 variance criteria. The front yard building setback, second variance, it's 98.6 feet from Madison Avenue where 100 feet is required. Once again, an existing condition. C1 variance, I believe, applies to that. We are not proposing any building improvements, so that would stay, and that's existing condition. The front yard parking setback to Madison Avenue, there's an existing parallel parking space that is 97.2 feet to the right-of-way where 100 feet is required. That is located on the exiting lanes to the right of the building, right at the front of that building. Note that those parking spaces are proposed to remain, so that the variance will remain. I believe that is under a C2 variance criteria for that. Another front yard setback for the parking on Old Glen Road, as Mr. Winters pointed out. The drive aisle at the corner is located about is 67.5 feet from the right-of-way. The nearest parking stall is about 92 feet across that drive aisle in this corner to that area. Mr. Winters pointed out that those spaces will just be restriped. No, there's no physical reconstruction of curb lines or realignments of those, the drive aisle or the parking stalls. I believe that is also a C2 variance covered under the C2 conditions. And all that, there's a section of the ordinance also that points out 95-31 C talks about side yard exceptions. This was something that was we discussed last time during the previous application. Parking may be permitted in the side yard, except that in the OL zones, the parking shall not be closer than 25 feet to a right-of-way line. So we're proposing to maintain the 97.2 feet to Madison Avenue and the 67.5 feet to Old Glen Road, which both far exceed that 25-foot requirement in the OL5 zone. The proposed variances that we are requesting, Mr. Winters didn't point on this, but just for a point, I don't know if a variance is required for this, but for parking stall size, 10 by 20 are required for retail, short-term commercial, and visitor parking, as was testified to, I believe. We don't classify in any of those conditions. We'd be classified under a long-term parking condition requiring 9 by 20 stalls. And in that condition, they can be reduced to 17.5 feet length if the overhang is provided where curbing is proposed. So I believe we can meet this condition. We do have 18-foot stalls along the island being proposed, as well as the parking along that's adjacent to the building. They do have the 2-foot overhang there, so we exceed the 17.5 foot. So I do not believe the variance is required for the 10 by 20s. I believe it comply under the 9 by 20s. But I'll leave that up to your board professional, your board planner to confirm. We're not changing any of the stall lengths in the rear of the parking that are 9 by 20s on the site right now. Mr. Winters talked about the off-street parking requirements. We have 190 that are existing, 191 are required, and 168 are proposed. 8 of them are electrical vehicle charging stations, as discussed. Provide an additional credit of 8 spaces to the 176 countable spaces, even though there are 168 physical spaces. So the variance is for 15 to 23 spaces it was testified that the tenant requires a maximum of 150. So therefore, there are at least 16 spaces that in theory would not be used. The reduction in parking results in a reduction of impervious surfaces, which reduces runoff, which is a benefit to the property as well as the existing infrastructure on site and along the adjacent roadways. The two big, let's get to the three real variances that we're really talking about today. That is the generator, the front building setback of 82.3 feet where 100 feet is required. I believe that's justified under the C2 criteria. The front yard is located along a state highway. It is commercially zoned across the street and to the properties to both the left and right of the subject property. As mentioned, buffer plantings are proposed to provide the necessary screening to prevent a more improved visual appearance of that to hide that structure. It's over 275 feet from the closest residential lot line along Old Glen Road. And there is existing landscaping along the road that will be enhanced as well to further improve the view as well as the attenuation of sound. The side yard setback, that is for the trash enclosure, the generator enclosure that's being proposed. The existing trash enclosure required is in variance condition. We are exacerbating that with the larger structure, as Mr. Winters pointed out. It's located near the existing site, moved to an area where it will not require any removal of trees. It is also located adjacent to a commercially zoned property. I think it is the best location on the site. It's been shifted also for ease of access for trash vehicles opposite the loading zone driveway. So it will actually improve circulation on the site as well. I believe that's under the C2 criteria also. The rooftop appurtenances, as Mr. Winters pointed out, the aggregate rooftop area appurtenances, including all areas within a screen or enclosure as identified at 95-34.5, shall not exceed 20% of the roof area. The calculations provided on the plan indicate that within that entire screened area, we're looking at 62.2%, but that includes both equipment and the roof and areas where walking surfaces are wood, which technically are not really part of the appurtenances, the walking areas to maintain those. Mr. Winters talked about a maximum of 30% coverage with all of the equipment that would be there, which does exceed the 20%. It'll all be screened. It'll all have the meet the noise ordinances. So I do not believe that is there is a detriment with that extra coverage based upon the user and the type of system that needs to be put into to make the use work in a viable situation. I believe that the proposed variances are justified under the C1 and C2 criteria, as I mentioned, and that certain purposes of the municipal land use law will be advanced by the granting of the deviations, and the benefits of the deviations would substantially outweigh any detriments. The goal of the master plan, the 1973 master plan, goal 5, and the 2017 master plan reexamination report, goal 4, talk about maintaining existing commercial areas and restriction on new development in recognition of available shopping facilities in nearby communities. Proposal brings a new tenant to occupy an existing underutilized building. The site improvements required are minimal to meet the needs of the proposed user and actually are less extensive than an office use would need here, especially with the parking demand. It also maintains the existing commercial use within an existing commercial zone with a permitted use. I believe the following purposes of the municipal land use law will be advanced by the granting of the variances. Purpose A, to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of all lands in the state in a manner which will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. The 4 variances that are being requested are all existing condition ones that are not being changed. Setbacks for the generator and trash enclosure will have minimal impact, in my opinion, on surrounding uses. The reduction of parking will not have an impact on the user and reduces the impervious footprint on site. Purpose C, to provide adequate light, air, and open space. All the improvements are ground improvements, which will maintain light, air, and open space areas on the site. Reduced parking stalls will eliminate the unneeded asphalt to reduce heat island effects on the property. Purpose G, to provide sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of agricultural, residential, recreational, commercial, and industrial uses and open space, both public and private, according to their respective environmental requirements in order to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens. The site is an existing underutilized office building, and proposed use is a permitted use in the zone as a laboratory, which will fill the need of what was intended to be there within the current zoning. And lastly, to promote a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques and good civic design and arrangement. The substantial landscaping proposed around the generator to screen, in addition to the existing vegetation that's present along Madison Avenue. There's additional landscaping, as testified, being provided along Old Glen Road to further screen the site from the adjacent homeowners, and also at the rear of the property. And it meets the tree replacement requirements and enhances the buffers around the perimeter of the site. The stall sizes at 19 by 18 are typical for these types of facilities. So in terms of the parking area, I don't think there's any issue with the 9 by 20 or the 9 by 18 stalls located adjacent to the islands. It is therefore my opinion as a professional planner that the benefits of granting the variances requested will substantially outweigh any detriments, of which I do not see any detriments. The negative criteria requires that the board find that there will be no substantial detriment to the public good and no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan and planning ordinance of the municipality. As I previously stated, the proposed use is a permitted use in the zone and is providing occupancy to an underutilized building. There are limited impacts to the adjacent properties in the residential zone due to the limited site improvements and the proposed screening and buffering that's being provided on the site in accordance with noise regulations governed by the state and the township. And that variances related to the improvement and upgrades to the mechanical equipment on the rooftop will be screened as well, not visible and attenuated based on that screen and the equipment being installed. It is therefore my opinion, for the reasons that I've stated previously, that the proposed variances will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the master plan and the zone ordinance, and that the benefits of granting these variances will substantially outweigh any detriments. Thank you.
No further questions.
So we've run up to our hour and 20 minutes. I'm inclined to start asking some questions, but I don't think we're going to finish. I don't think we're going to get the public in. I don't think we're going to have time to deliberate. So I'll poll the board if you want to continue this application.
Hear what you're saying.
I don't think we're going to finish. We do have another applicant that we got to give the same respect to.
Mr. Chairman?
Anyone feels?
George has something.
You're not audible to me. I don't know if your microphone is off.
Yes, George, it was off. I apologize. I'm just polling the board real quick to see if we will continue with this application or whether we're going to ask them to come back. I'm not comfortable that we're going to get done.
Yeah.
Okay. So that we're going to ask you to come back. So if we could.
I would ask if we could at least get some of the questions for the planner.
Sure. We have no problem going on for another 5 to 10 minutes, but I just want to, I'd hate for all these questions to get done and then we're going to then sit and deliberate for 20 minutes or something. So.
I mean, I would point out that we are close. We're definitely not going to finish the next application. If it's possible to wrap this up, I think it would be beneficial.
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Van Order and we'll see how fast we can get done. I just don't want to push it because that wouldn't be fair to you.
No, we appreciate that. Thank you. And it's just, if everyone's here and if we could get
Got a
it
large
done,
room and I'm assuming that
try.
most of the people that are here for the next one.
That's our hope as well.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flowers? Goodbye.
Yeah, only one quick question. You said you don't think that the variance for the reduced number of parking spaces would impact the user. Saying, I mean, that's by ordinance, there are fewer spaces than were required, but you think that there are still sufficient spaces for this particular use.
As Mr. Winters pointed out, the maximum anticipated number of spaces to be needed is 150. We have 168 physical spaces on the property.
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions.
Mr. Quillen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one question for Mr. Delaney, which is about additional screening for the generator and whether you think that it would be a good idea and whether the applicant would be willing to put a couple of trees in the front yard between the buffer that you've already proposed and Madison Avenue, trees that would get reasonably large and or are evergreen trees.
The applicant would agree to that.
Okay, I don't know how the other board members would feel about that. Some may be opposed to the application.
Yeah, we're
Anyway,
just gonna,
I think that might be helpful. Okay, that was it
Thank
for me. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Quillen. Mr. Slate?
I have no questions.
I have no questions.
Okay, then we're gonna open up questions to the public for this planning witness. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have a question. Take your time.
Okay, so the question is, oh, Amy Merle, same person that was here before. Okay.
We need your address, ma'am.
Oh, 3 Old Glen Road. Okay, so is this, am I allowed to comment or is it just a question?
This is a question.
Okay.
You're gonna sit down and then you'll have an opportunity to come and comment.
Okay, so the question is back to that loading dock thing, whatever, that's right across from my house. The question is, it's not going to be that high. You all mentioned that, but what about the equipment that is going to be on top of that loading dock? Is that going to stay there? Because the plants you're talking about are 2 feet high. It's not going to cover that.
It's flush mount. There is no equipment on top of it.
So in other words, they load things up, they use a forklift, scissor lift, whatever it is, and then that lift goes away. It doesn't stay on that
It
platform.
goes back to the
It goes
ground
back to
level.
the thing. And the platform is a flat
That's
piece of
correct.
concrete. Okay, so the question
Well,
that
not concrete, but yes.
Okay, so the question that I forgot to ask before is, you had mentioned that you can't move it to the side where all the businesses are. Is it a possibility to push it or maybe put it up a little closer to the building? So it's not, because the further back you go in that parking lot, it affects where we live.
We can't without impacting circulation, which would cause additional problems. And then that being said, we're not asking for any variances in connection with that lift.
Okay, and so you can't move it. In other words, it has to stay exactly where it is, you're saying. It can't go a little to the right, it can't go up towards the building. There's no other option. That's it.
If you follow the plan real quickly, the trucks will be entering off on the one side of the building close to Old Glen Road and circulating through the site. They'll pull past the lift and put the back of the truck will be where the lift is. And that's where they'll unload it. And then you need enough room for them to be able to then circulate out to the exit lane to get out the site. So the lift has been placed as far away from the residential properties as possible.
Really far, like at the edge.
Yes.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna. Oh. Nope. Okay, any other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. We're gonna open up the, I think we're pushed through.
Let's go through.
So we're gonna open up the floor now to any comments, testimony from the public. So would anyone like to make a comment on this application? Okay. Oh, yes. Can you come up to the microphone, give us your name, and you're going to need to be sworn in if you're going to be making a comment.
Sorry, Oksana Yatsu, 5 Old Glen. And that's
Hold on a second. Our attorney's going to swear you in.
Yes, I do. So that is regarding that front generator, and that's a comment because there was not a request, but kind of like asked to move it to the side. Please don't do that. Leave it in front because there is a noise in front already. People are moving on Madison, so they do not care about that noise. We do truly care about that.
Yeah, but we were talking about moving it to the other side.
Yes, still, because it actually going to, the noise is going to flow to our properties, which is going to be us, which is going to be Barbara. 3 of us are going to be affected, at least 4 even.
Just to be clear, they were talking about moving to this side of the building, further away from the residents.
If you're going to keep it right there, then I guess it's going to be okay, but no kind of like, because I thought it's going to go more towards the trash can, whatever the trash is right now, which is then it can fly basically. You're going to hear.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from? No? Okay, we're going to close public testimony. And Counselor, you can close your hearing,
We
your
really
application.
appreciate it, but we're going to rest on the proofs that have been provided and the testimony that all the professionals have given to the board. We thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'll entertain a motion from any of the board members.
I move for approval with all of the variance requests and other conditions that were described.
I'll
Mr.
second
Bai
Ms.
is out of the
Murphy's
room.
motion.
Do you want to give us a second? I don't know whether he. Oh, there you are. Sorry, couldn't see you. Very good. So we have a second from Ms. Van Order, and we'll open up for discussion. Any of the board members want to discuss the application? Mr. Quillen?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the board whether, as one of the conditions of approval, you would like to require that the applicant put some decent sized trees in the front yard to screen that generator.
They already agreed to that.
I have that in as a stipulation.
Okay. So my comment, I'll just briefly tell you my comment about the application. I think overall this is better than what was approved by the board last time. That generator, however, does bother me quite a bit. And I'm hopeful that some further screening with some just distracting. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. We're listening.
I'm hoping that some further screening with trees between the enclosure and the Madison Avenue right of way will reduce the visual impact. Sorry, there's an echo. I keep hearing my own voice with a 2-second delay, so that's what's causing me to fetch up there. All right, I'm through. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, yeah, I'll just agree with Mr. Quillen. I think I like this application better than what we approved before. I am bothered by the need to put the generator up front and the effect on the landscape and the view from the street. But I think the reduction, the lack of a need for additional parking spaces and no more impervious surface generated, and the improvement in the screening that they've included in the plan around the property other than the generator overcomes my objection to the generator in front.
Mr. Flowers? Anything? So just a quick question. And again, I think I asked it earlier. I'll just ask it again because I'm a little confused. So the applicant is a different owner than the applicant that was here last time. And the applicant that was here last time got approval to bank a whole bunch of parking spaces, which would mean all types of improvements along Old Glen Road to create a layer of parking. And what I kind of understood is 2 different things. This application would supersede it, so then that parking would not be allowed? Or did Mr. Slate say that that was approved and therefore those 50 or whatever banked spaces, if this applicant decided it needed them, it could bring those spaces back?
I'll let Mr. Flynn confirm it, but that approval would stand, correct, unless the applicant were to give it up.
Well, but they're coming in for a new site plan, right? So I think the new site plan would supersede. But one potential way to fix this, just to make it cleaner in terms of any resolution that comes out, is you could ask the applicant whether or not they would, as a condition of approval, vacate that, whatever the bank spaces issue that came up at the previous application. They could waive that as a condition if that's something the board wanted to entertain, just to address the concern from the member of the public as well.
So in that regard, just briefly, from the legal standpoint, those approvals, they run with the land. The one hurdle there, which otherwise it would be a good suggestion, in this case, there are certain variances that were granted at that prior time that we're just essentially saying that we're going to keep what was already acknowledged as a pre-existing nonconformity, or were granted, such as the parking stalls. And so those approvals would have to stand based off of how the requests are made in this application. But if it's any solace, what we can acknowledge is that this is the development, this is the proposal that we're acting on.
The site plan, as stated by Mr. Farrar, the site plan runs with the land, but to the extent to any modifications that are part of this application, that supersedes the prior approval. That makes sense.
I'm still confused, but I just wanted to give the homeowners that made the question a little more clarity. Maybe the other board members are okay with that. I'm just going to make a comment for myself. I'm not happy with the idea of putting this generator in the front. I think it goes against the visioning that a lot of people spent a lot of time on, their idea of what Madison Avenue should look like. And I believe that this is opening the floodgates for more. So that's my comments. Sonia, would you move forward with the roll? We have a first and a second. We've completed discussion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Quillen?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Flowers?
Yes.
Ms. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Vine?
Yes.
Ms. Van Water?
Yes.
Mr. Alesso?
No.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Counselor. Congratulations.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time pushing
Okay.
through it.
Thank you. So would it be appropriate if we took a quick 5 minutes? So we'll come back at 9 o'clock. We'll ask the next applicant to get started promptly at 9 o'clock. We'll take a roll call and we'll move on. Thank you. And get everybody home in case anybody wants to watch.
This meeting is being recorded.
No, kidding. So Sonia, would you give us a roll call, please?
Mr. Vine?
Yes, here.
Ms. Murphy?
Here.
Mr. Quillen?
Here. Here.
Ms. Wilson?
Here.
Ms. Van Water?
Here.
Mr. Flowers?
Here.
Mr. Flynn?
Here.
Mr. Flynn. Ms. Blaney?
Here.
Ms. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Fishinger?
Here.
I, Sonia Santiago, here.
Sonia, could you also note that I'm here?
Yes, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I asked the applicant, we set some ground rules earlier. We had some technical difficulties. We were also close to finishing up that application, so we let it go over. We're going to give you guys till 10, quarter after 10 to try to wrap up whatever it is. I won't cut you off if you're in the middle of a witness testifying or if you're in the middle of answering a question. So I ask you to jump into it as quickly as possible.
Yep.
And let's get right to your testimony.
All right, great, thank you. Rich, you want to pull up the witness list if you can? Before I call our first witness, which is Rich Barrington right over here, our engineer, I just want to go through real quickly a little housekeeping. First, let me recap where we've been and where we're going so everybody knows. Last meeting, if Rich is going to pull up our witness list, you heard from the president, Mark de Grand Prix. You heard from Connor Lade, who is Senior Manager of Alumni and Player Relations. And you heard from John Amorosa, who's the former Director of Construction and Building and really an owner's rep. And coming up, you'll hear from Rich Barrington to my right. He's from WSP. He'll talk about the engineering details. You see it here. Then after him, Bob Zeller. Bob is from Musco Lighting, so he'll discuss the lighting. I don't know how far we'll get. John Amorosa is going to come back up just to talk about the schedule because there were a lot of questions about a day in the life or a day in the week or a week in the life of the Red Bulls facility. Then Eric Keller will talk about traffic. Kristen Bird is our architect, and Gerdo Aquino is our landscape architect. And that's really our witnesses. Since we met last time, we did get, and we're happy to say we did get county planning board approval. So we had that by letter of August 29th. And just, there was a little confusion about a pamphlet that was handed out last time. And I wanted to just make a couple of statements about that. That handout included Red Bull trademarks, including on the cover page. Obviously, unfortunately, the unauthorized use of Red Bull trademarks can lead to confusion, and that's what it did here. Paul Phillips showed it to me. I didn't know where it came from. He asked if the Red Bulls prepared it. We didn't. So that caused confusion, we believe, both in information, where it came from, the source of information. It wasn't from us, and also it was inaccurate. It goes without saying that the Red Bulls take the protection of their brand very seriously. And so it's a violation of trademark law. And so we would ask people be very careful about using the red mark trademark. So with that, I'm going to call Rich Barrington, our first witness, to talk about the engineering details.
Was Mr. Barrington sworn in at the last hearing?
No.
No, okay.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Can you give your name, address, and credentials to the board?
Richard Barrington, 332 Maple Street in New Providence, New Jersey. I'm a licensed professional engineer in New Jersey and New York. I've appeared before numerous boards in New Jersey, in Morris County, Middlesex County, Bergen County. I have roughly 25 years of experience.
He's acceptable.
Okay, thank you. So Rich, would you give the board the benefit of the engineering details of this project?
Great. Thank you. So starting off, I really wanted to just go through just some of the timeline with where we are. I mean, we're really at the tail end of what's been a really long process. The project site itself was subject to a significant redevelopment planning exercise, which culminated in a redevelopment plan, really led by Honeywell, the property owner for the entire property at that time, moved into a general development plan, which Honeywell had prepared. The GDP at that time had three main components. It had a non-residential component designated for lots 4 and 5, which is our property. It has a residential component, which has now since been built out on each side. And it had an open space component, which has been dedicated and that's been completed. There were many conditions within the GDP. The property was subdivided to allow for the different development. The creation of a Columbia Park Owners Association, which ultimately led to dedication of easements for roadway. For example, the property on Lot 4 and Lot 5 was granted easements to use properties outside those property lines. Similarly, the residential properties were granted easements to use both Stockton and Prescott Drive on lots 4 and 5. Walkways and trails were created along the entire development. Traffic improvements were made. The intersection of Stockton and Columbia was shifted. The traffic signal was new. All of this was done really to accommodate the residential and the non-residential component of the property. There were stormwater improvements. There were 2 primary detention basins on the site at the time. Improvements were made to the north detention basin to accommodate the full development. Improvements were made to the south detention basin over in this area to accommodate the full development, residential and non-residential. Additionally, improvements were made. A new sanitary pump station was designed and constructed. The sanitary pump station was designed for the residential and the non-residential component. Residential site plan was approved. The residential properties have since been built out and completed. At the time also, a non-residential site plan application was made with an approval granted. At that time, and this is the slide in front of you, that application had roughly 900,000 gross square feet of research or office space. It also included roughly 3,000 parking stalls.
Since that time, we've amended the GDP to allow the non-residential definition to be expanded to make sure it includes a professional sports use. So within the zoning now, there are two non-residential components. There's the research and office use. There's also an athletic facility use.
Rich, for a second, this is a historic document, but maybe we should mark it as an exhibit. Can you just explain what it is?
Yes, this is the commercial site plan, the overall site plan that was submitted and approved. Essentially, it shows a full build out, which consisted of the main Honeywell building, which has since been demolished. It also included 4 research or office buildings. I don't believe at the time a designation was made for what type of office, what type of research. That would have been handled later. 3,000 parking stalls. There were parking decks. Really designed to be built under the non-residential zoning, which is still in place.
And so let's mark that as 8-3. Is that okay, Counselor?
Since that time, the GDP was amended, and where we are today is essentially with our site plan, major site plan submission for the Red Bulls athletic training facility. Existing conditions as of today, essentially the area, this is an aerial from 2021 showing full build out of the residential component on the east side, full build out of the residential on the western side. The brown area is essentially the new aerial that was flown by our surveyor. The site has basically been demolished. The former Honeywell building that was on lot 4 has been demolished. All the previous research buildings by Honeywell have since been demolished. What remains on the site essentially today is a series of former access roads. There's remnants of parking lots. There's existing utilities that remain on the site.
Can we mark this exhibit as well? Can you describe it, the date of it? And is this something you prepared?
Yes, this is an existing condition aerial. This was within the GDP amendment plan itself.
Okay.
The Red Bulls property itself consists of 2 properties, Lot 4 and Lot 5. All taken together, they're roughly 80.3 acres. It's consistent with the subdivision that was filed and approved. In terms of existing features, it's been mostly demolished. Other key features on the site, Stockton Drive, which runs through the middle of Lot 5, Prescott Road, which is on Lot 5. Both these roads are within the applicant's property. The Northern Detention Basin, which accepts stormwater from a portion of the residential and is designated to accept stormwater from the non-residential site. The Southern Detention Basins, which I'll talk about later, are here really to the west of the western townhomes. Other features on the site, there still remains an existing guard booth today. Our site plan plans to demolish and remove the guard booth in place on Stockton. There's also an existing water tower located off Prescott Road. Our application shows that water tower remaining in place. Natural resources, there are various wetlands located. I'm going to move to the next slide, I think.
And as you go through the slides, if it's something that hasn't been submitted or if it's colorized, just describe it and so we can mark it as an exhibit.
Great. So this is the environmental constraints plan, which is in the package. It's been colorized to help with explanations.
Okay, so A5, yes.
Natural resources. The development is really contained within the core of the site. There are several wetlands along the perimeter. There's a wetlands on the northern portion of the site. There's a pocket of wetlands adjacent to the golf course. Also, a portion of the detention basin, the eastern side, was designated as wetlands as well, with a transition area. The southern basins were not designated wetlands. Mature vegetation, for the most part, if you remember the slide before, a lot of the site has been cleared. So as I talk about tree removal, we've taken credit for trees that were previously on site, in addition to trees that we'll remove. However, we are concentrating our development. There's a mature stand of trees in the front of the site that we're not choosing not to impact. The parking lot has been set back to avoid impacting those trees. There's also a mature stand of trees located off of the approach to Stockton, which also is designated to remain. There's another set of trees located next to the Aldrich Court townhouses, which we designed the development to avoid those trees. A set of trees along this service road at the top of the hill. Those are designated to remain. Another tree is located, the largest tree on the property, which is a 48-inch tree, located roughly in this location, is designated to remain. The site plan has been revised to allow that tree to remain. Contamination. The site currently, all of Lot 4 and all of Lot 5 has a deed notice. Essentially what that means is there's contamination on the site and there's restrictions with how the site is used. In addition to the deed notice, there is an area roughly here in the Field 9 area that has an engineering cap. Essentially the worst parts of pesticide contaminated soils that were within the eastern residential area were transported off the eastern residential area, stockpiled underneath this Field 9 area and capped. Cap has been approved by DEP. As part of our work, we would look to modify that cap to accommodate the field and the parking lot. Another area of concern is underneath the Field 4 area. There is an area within the previous remedial action permit by DEP that still has to be capped. This work has not yet been completed. It was designated by Honeywell to be completed by the future developer. So whether that was office or whether that was athletic facilities, whoever the person is who develops this will have to install an engineering cap underneath this Field 4 area. The area of contamination in this area was deemed at SHMU 3. Essentially, it was a former industrial storage area. There's SVOCs, VOCs, various contaminants. However, again, as I mentioned, a permit was issued by the DEP to allow this area to be capped. Last environmental concern on the property is the groundwater. Essentially, Honeywell is still the responsible party on site and will remain the responsible party on site even after development of this site. Honeywell is currently monitoring groundwater remediation. Most recently with the report issue, they will be continuing to perform groundwater remediation under this property for the foreseeable future.
Rich, I just want to clarify or make something clear. We're complying with all environmental laws. In fact, our fields actually serve as a good cap or even a better cap than many caps that are required.
That's correct. Essentially, the way the process will work, though, is we will be engaging a licensed site remediation professional. The LSRP, as it's called, will essentially be responsible for replacing this deed notice with a new deed notice that reflects the new development. As part of the new deed notice, there will be a new cap underneath the Dieldrin area. There'll be a new cap underneath the SHMU 3 area. So this will be overseen, regulated by the LSRP in accordance with DEP standards. One other environmental constraint I wanted to point out are steep slopes. We are requesting a waiver for impact to steep slopes. Essentially, the areas over the existing slopes over 25% should not be impacted. Our proposal impacts roughly 1 acre of those areas. Essentially, those areas are shown in the blue on the map here. The reason for this impact is the demolition that was performed on site pretty much left a lot of unstable hills or piles of dirt that are essentially slopes now. The largest reason for the impact, though, is primarily the landscaping. We are proposing to landscape an existing slope adjacent to the western townhomes. As part of some of our earlier communications with members of the community, this slope was identified as something that required stabilization. So we've taken that on, and essentially we will be replanting, reseeding that slope to better stabilize it. Okay, moving to the next presentation slide. This is essentially the overall site plan that was included in the package. I've added a little bit of color to better depict the setbacks. The blue line, which circles the site, represents.
And what number is this numbered as a?
It's site plan, overall site plan C10.
C10. Okay, thank you. Take 6, Matt. Sure. Yep.
So we've colorized this essentially. So blue represents the building setbacks within the zoning for the athletic facility use. Just a few things of note. All the buildings themselves, and we've got 9 buildings. We have 380 parking stalls on site. All of the buildings have been designed within that building setback. We are going to request variances for a few items, which I'll talk about later, but the principal buildings, whether it be the main building, Building A, the dormitory building, which is adjacent to it, Building B, which is a field house, Building C, which is an indoor field, Buildings D and E, which are the women's wing, and then Building F1, which is a groundskeeping building, Building F2, which is another groundskeeping annex, and then there's some smaller outbuildings within the site as well. So all the buildings have been designed essentially within the main building setback. As you can see from essentially where the blue line is, they're not just within, in most cases, they've exceeded the setback. We do have some pinch points where the building brushes up right against the corner. The indoor field building, for example, is designed exactly at the building setback location. That is the closest point. All other buildings have been designed to exceed the minimum setback requirement. As far as parking goes, we've taken a similar approach. The red line that goes around the perimeter essentially represents the outdoor field setback and the parking setback. Both of those setbacks are the same. As you can see, not only have we met the minimum, but we've exceeded those setbacks. Running through the parking really quickly, we are requesting as part of our application, we have a number of 381 stalls under the full build out. We have a number of 413 parking stalls under the phase 1 scenario. I'll talk about the derivation of those later. Impervious coverage. Again, there was a 35% maximum requirement for impervious coverage. Our proposal is 23%. The building coverage, there's a requirement of 10% max. Our proposal is 5%. It gets significantly less than the requirement. Building setback to Columbia Road. The setback was 450 feet, primarily to protect the front lawn here. Not only are the buildings setback, but really this area is mostly undisturbed. The only area of disturbance we really have is an additional walkway, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Building setback to the residential overlays. The requirement was 125 feet. Building F2, which is a small outbuilding down here, is located 165 feet. The main building, Building A, is at 170 feet. As I mentioned before, all of these exceed the minimums. One other further note here, the zone setback for the commercial use, the other non-residential use, is a 0-foot building setback. So while even the other applicant, the site plan I showed, did set their buildings back, nonetheless, the zoning does have a very open-ended setback for other office or research uses. Setbacks and variances. We do have a few technical variances that I'd like to discuss. The chiller and generator, and I'll start down here at this location next to Building A. The chiller and generator are deemed accessory structures. Because they are accessory structures, they should have the same setback as the principal building setback. The chiller in this case exceeds the principal building, the building setback by roughly 10 feet. So this is a variance we're requesting. The chiller and generator in this location were cited, again, primarily to provide the most offset from the eastern residential townhomes. There are other locations, as you can see on the site plan, to the east of the parking, to the east of Building A, where they could have been sited. However, the site or the location shown was really done to try to maximize the offset to the residential. The distance to chiller and generator are roughly 400 feet to that residential property line. So it's a fairly significant difference. The variance we're requesting is to the PUD boundary, which has a 170-foot setback. So we'd be requesting a setback less than that.
And that's that area that the setback goes up against is the golf course, correct?
That's correct. Okay. Also, just one note about these items, both the chiller and generator are within the secured fenced area, which is a 10-foot fence. I will talk about fencing a little bit later. The other technical variance we're requesting is essentially a guardhouse. We're requesting a small 6x10 guardhouse really to help answer questions, control traffic flow through the site. This will be a secure parking facility. If you have a reason to be there, that's fine. But if not, the purpose of the guardhouse is somebody there who will help guide people to where they need to be on site. If there's somebody who's not supposed to be there, they will get turned away. The guardhouse, ironically, is pretty much the same location where Honeywell had a guardhouse in their previous site development. Nonetheless, though, because it is within the setback, it's within both the front Columbia Road setback, it's also within the side yard setback, which is directly adjacent to the self-storage building. Two other things to discuss in terms of technical variances along the same vein. The chiller and generator set that feeds the northernmost buildings, Building B, Building C, Buildings D and E, is also within the side yard setback. Also, the trash refuse enclosure is also within the setback. All of these things are also within the secured fencing area. To note that. The last technical variance that we'd be seeking is essentially there will be a fuel storage tank next to building F1. We're expecting that's roughly by a couple feet. We don't have a final design on the fuel storage tank itself at this time, but we are expecting that could impact or infringe into the setback area. The gen set in this location also, it's roughly 390 feet from the generator set and chiller set to the residential neighborhood to the north. It's directly adjacent to the commercial self-storage property, but if you were to add in the self-storage property to the offset to those units, it would be roughly 390 feet, just a shade under 400. Okay. Fencing. So the zoning language permitted essentially the fencing to be up to 10 feet, secure fencing around fields, secure fencing around the perimeter. What we've sought to do is bring the fencing in. The fencing, for the most part, if I take fields 1, 2, 3, and 4, runs along the field perimeter. It's set back from Prescott Road. The fencing on the eastern side is also set back from Stockton Road. It runs along the perimeter of the parking lot into the building. Moving further along other areas of fencing. The main parking lot, the fencing is just to the east. So the majority of what you see when you're driving up on Stockton Road is open area. Field 9 will be fenced. Both the parking area and Field 9 will be fenced. Generally, too, one other note about fencing. Where the fencing is directly behind a goal, there will be netting up to 30 foot high. So the total combined height, and that's the fence plus the netting, will be 30 foot total. So that's not 30 foot of netting on top of 10 feet of fence. So the fencing itself is a combination of chain link, ornamental metal. Generally, the chain link is used in areas where it could be struck by a soccer ball, and other areas where it's possible it could be visible. For example, this area, it's a decorative fence. In the area here, where it's near the front, it's a decorative fence. So fence details are within the plan package.
And I know you'll get to this later, and we have a landscape architect, but there's landscape buffers between the road and the fences. So the fence is inside, in the interior of a landscape buffer. Is that correct?
It is, and just adding to your point, like for example, the area in the pro parking lot, essentially the distance to the parking lot to the opposite, the property line is 152 feet. So roughly you're going to have about 120 feet of buffer between the parking lot and Stockton Drive at that point. That buffer distance increases the further you get to Prescott. Okay. Security and access. So generally, the site is entirely secure. We have different parking lots. We have a pro parking lot, which is an 88 stall parking lot. This parking lot is designated purely for the Red Bulls 1 and the Red Bulls 2 professional players. Access to this parking lot would be via an access card. You would drive into the driveway, swipe your card, and the gate would open, and then you'd be permitted entry. These parking stalls are basically designated for those folks. There'll be nobody from the academy program, nobody from youth clinics using this parking lot. This is solely for the professional players, coaches, trainers. The main parking lot is a 216 stall parking lot. This is essentially what we've dubbed the public lot. There is security, there's a guardhouse access on each side. However, the intent is this parking lot would be the primary use for the academy programs, primary use for camps, for clinics, all those programs. The guard booth essentially would be monitored. It's possible also that during academy hours when you're expecting people in, that the gates are effectively left open for folks to freely come in. Main access, and Mr. Keller will talk more about this in his testimony, but the parking lot and main access for the public lot is primarily off of Stockton Drive. It also has access off of the service drive, which is in there. Mr. Keller will give testimony as to where everybody's coming from, how this relates to the traffic that would be on Stockton and on the service road. Additional parking at the site. The women's wing has a 39 stall parking lot. This again would also be a private lot dedicated solely for the women's professional team, women's academy coaches, those uses. This would not be open to academy or camps or clinics. The grounds area also would have, there's a few spaces in there for maintenance personnel. About 6 stalls there. And the last parking lot we have on the site is essentially a small parking lot next to Field 9. We've got 25 stalls. We looked at doing more stalls, but essentially due to the trying not to impact the tree stand on one side, also trying not to impact the steep slopes on the other side, and trying to allow the existing tree stand on the other side of Field 9 to remain really jammed us in. So we've minimized the size of Field 9. We've minimized the size of that Field 9 parking lot primarily to stay within the constraints of the property itself. Off-street parking. So what we did to really understand that, and parking as the zoning reads is at the discretion of the board. We were fortunate enough, we have an existing facility in Hanover. We have 4 fields. So what we essentially did was to take a look at how that facility was operating. We wanted to see, are there enough parking stalls for this use? Are there enough parking stalls for that use? So we went out there, we surveyed how people were coming in, who's dropping off people, who's doing a drop off and then staying for the entire session. Based on the surveys we did, we then came back and we just extrapolated out to the proposed programs at this facility. Essentially, the facility at Hanover Lane has 4 fields. It's going to operate a little differently than a facility that has 9 fields. Additionally, the current facility doesn't have a full women's program right now. So as that women's program grows here, that's something else that would happen. So what we did, we took the numbers that we surveyed, we extrapolated them out to the program, and we essentially developed our parking count. And there is some planning to share parking in the public lot. It's possible that that 216 parking stall lot could be used for a variety of uses. You could have office workers there at the end of the day coming in, sharing the lot with the earlier practices. Essentially, as you get later into the night, it becomes really just youth practices for the academy, people coming in and out. At 216 stalls within that parking lot, we can accommodate a large amount of teams coming in and practicing and a large amount of teams coming in to wait for the next session. So we've built up the capacity of this parking lot with the understanding of we want to keep people on site and we want to allow for parking. The parking itself also has a significantly larger drop-off zone. We've allowed for about 120 feet of drop-off here in this area. We've allowed for another 120 feet of drop-off next to Building B. So besides the 216 parking stalls, we've allowed for a very large, significant drop-off area, recognizing that at many of these practices, people are not pulling into a stall. They just want to drive in, pick up their son or daughter, and then leave. So we've increased the area for that.
Did you move the dropping area based on residents' concerns?
So the other drop-off area, we do have another parking lot essentially proximate to the entrance. We have a small drop-off with some accessible parking next to the front entrance of the building. This is not planned to be used for practices. We're able to really control the kids and how people are moving on the site because the way the gates are located. We have a main gate here between building B and C, which allows pretty much all the people, pedestrians, players who are dropped off here to come right into the field complex. So we've set up the fencing, the parking, the layout so that this small drop off here is really for a front entrance to the building. The distance from the main entrance to the building A to the main lot it's fairly significant. It's nearly 360 feet. So it's needed to have a drop off in the front of the building. The parking, I think I mentioned here, the parking for the pro lot is 88 players, 88 stalls. One other note for the parking lot here, and the reason for the large circle at the top end of this is the parking lot will accommodate motor coaches. Essentially players, they have an away game. Essentially the plan is to bring the motor coach into the parking lot through the circle. It would pick up players and then exit the property. Okay. Off-street loading. So the property itself has two areas of loading and unloading, really done by north and south. Starting in the north area, essentially next to the grounds building, there is a yard area. Within the yard area, we have a trash refuse area. There will also be some storage within that building. So there will be some deliveries for, could be soccer balls, other soccer related equipment would be done within this yard area. There's trash removal, I think I mentioned up here as well. The second loading and unloading area is within building A. What's not showing, the reason you're not seeing on the site plan is because there is a loading dock within the basement area of building A.
Again, describe the plan. Oh.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the next one, the loading dock.
Yeah.
So again, if you're orienting yourself, this is essentially the site plan. We have one truck turned on, which I'll explain in a minute. This is the pro parking lot.
Was this plan submitted or is this colorized in some way?
The plan was submitted, but the truck movement was not submitted.
Okay, so what page of the site plan is this? Do you know?
It's one of the site plans. Yeah, it's
Okay.
within the plan
Okay.
package. Yeah.
But it's but this plan that you're showing, you prepared to show how
We
the
did.
truck movements.
Correct.
Okay.
So what's designated loading dock here, essentially there is a loading dock area
Call it the loading dock plan? Okay.
within the base,
A7.
within the basement of the building. The loading dock itself, that's where it has a trash compactor, recycling compactor. It will accommodate all food deliveries. It will accommodate any office needs, any function. This is the primary loading dock for the property, essentially. The dock itself is designed so that a truck can pull in. It's got a 24-foot driveway. We have a secure area here. The gate that accesses the loading dock will be left open for the majority of time. There will be an intercom there, so if it is off hours or if somebody from maintenance left the gate closed, they would have a way to get the gate open. The gate itself is set roughly 50 foot back from the road, so there is room for a truck essentially to pull off the road, queue up, and use the intercom without impacting traffic along Prescott Drive. The dock itself is covered, so it's roughly 25 feet below grade. It's very deep. The dock itself has a turnaround for trucks. So essentially a truck would pull up, back into the dock, and pull out. The dock itself has room for up to two bays, in addition to trash removal and or recycling. The dock itself was placed here primarily to avoid visual impacts, minimize noise impacts, really just sensitive to the adjacent community, trying to create something that was hidden from view, and that can be operated efficiently for the facility. What we're showing on here essentially is the truck move. This is essentially a 30-foot trailer, SU-30 truck. The design of the access for the loading dock, the curb radius on each side was essentially designed so that 30-foot truck can essentially pull down Prescott, turn into the access drive without even going into the opposite lane of traffic. If there ever is a truck larger than this, Red Bulls will have maintenance staff on site. So if for some reason, if there was a truck larger than that, if you needed to replace a chiller unit or something and it came on the back of a really large flatbed, maintenance personnel would be on site to help the truck navigate into the loading dock area. The dock itself is designed to accommodate up to a 50-foot truck. So the dock, the size itself was expanded to accommodate very large vehicles so that there's never any possibility that something would need to stop on Prescott Road with extra maintenance support.
And I know Eric will talk about this when he speaks, but we're not anticipating regular deliveries of big, large trucks. Correct?
No, we don't. The 30-foot truck is what we expect for mostly, again, there would be produce, fresh food, because there is a on-site cook, an on-site cafeteria. So there would be food deliveries. We expect that every day, plus your regular Amazon, FedEx, UPS type deliveries. One other thing just to note, we've done our best in terms of designing the layouts for these to minimize the curb return on the other side. The property itself does have easements to use Prescott all the way out to the west. However, if you see that this curb radius, we're trying to discourage people from making that turn. We want people going out towards Columbia Road. And we've done that with the loading dock drive. We've done that with the parking lot, all the parking lots as well. And going back to the site plan. Light poles, I just wanted to touch on light poles very quickly. There was a bulk requirement that all athletic light poles have a 200-foot offset from the residential property line. We've exceeded that. The nearest light pole to the western townhomes is 236 feet. The nearest light pole to the eastern townhomes is 387 feet. The zoning allows up to 90 feet. We have 2 poles at 90 feet. The other poles are all 80 feet. Mr. Zoller will be talking further tonight about the lighting, light levels and things like that. Other things.
Rich, would you just go quickly through the perimeter of the property? Because the property is what, 81 acres and we're using how much?
Roughly 45
Okay.
is our limit of disturbance.
And can you just,
And of the
bring your
45,
cursor-
a fair amount is landscaping and buffers, slope restoration, things like that.
Would you just with your cursor run around the perimeter of the property real quickly?
The property itself
Yes.
goes from Columbia Road, adjacent to the self-storage
Right.
property. It abuts up and runs adjacent to technically the school property.
Mhm.
Then there's a little angle here that was part of the open space dedication, which is why that property line looks like that.
Mhm.
Then the property line runs pretty much roughly 10 to 15 feet off the edge of the western townhomes.
Mhm.
Property line is at the base of the hill.
Mhm.
Comes down, circles around the water tank. Then the property line runs adjacent to the golf course. Property line then runs roughly on the other side of Stockton. The property line is roughly 5 feet off of the eastern townhomes.
Mhm.
Then runs around those townhomes,
Mhm.
again with very negligible buffer, negligible offset, setback, anything,
Mhm.
pretty much circling those townhome units.
Mhm.
Then it has this strange little rectangle area that was
Mhm.
carved out,
Mhm.
running more, and then it just goes out to Columbia Road.
Okay, thank you.
So just one other, just in terms of a few other things, retaining walls. We do have a few minor retaining walls on site. Retaining walls are code compliant. They're all below 6 feet. Signage, which is at the discretion of the board, will be discussed by both Eric and Kristen Bird, the architect. A few things that we've incorporated into the plan I do want to point out. It was expressed that there was a concern, and we definitely agreed with this concern, that some of the walkways were discontinuous. If you're out there walking the trails, walking the sidewalks, there's several dead ends. We've added in essentially from the end of Aldrich Court here, these townhomes, we've added a concrete sidewalk that runs parallel to Stockton. At this point, we've added on the other side of the parking lot, it would be an asphalt trail that runs in this curvilinear manner down to the existing walkway along Columbia. The walkway itself in this portion where it's asphalt seeks to really move between the existing trees, avoiding any further impact, and keep the slope of that trail to a minimum. Additionally, we've added a trail connection from the new trail to the existing trail that goes around the northern detention basin. Striping, in some of our earlier meetings, there was a request from the community to add striping along Prescott with crosswalks and crosswalk signage. We've added a crosswalk, which is primarily for Red Bull's use from the Field 9 area to the main campus. Additionally, we've added signage to accommodate those crosswalks. We added a crosswalk near the western townhomes that connects the two trails. The crosswalk there also has the in-street signage on both sides, which would help slow people down. We've added striping along Prescott, so we've added a double yellow line along Prescott for the duration from Park Avenue as far as we can. Additionally, another comment was the erosion along the western townhome hill. We've incorporated a landscaping plan to restore the erosion there, erosion issues, repair the drainage. There was a concern expressed about drainage within the northwestern corner of the property. We've developed a grading and drainage plan, which really will significantly improve things in that area. It captures everything. It makes use of the existing drainage system. The service road has now been pitched inward towards the site. So in addition, a ditch was provided, plus the service road is pitched inward. Other things we've done as part of this design, and this is really design intent more than anything else, was the size of Field 9 in the parking lot. We've shifted and reduced the size of Field 9 to avoid mature trees in this area. It also allowed us to increase plantings in this area. The parking lot, we have 25 stalls. It would have been nicer to have had more, but again, due to the tree stand on one side, the tree stand on the other side, and the steep slopes, we've reduced the size of this. The basement loading dock, it's It's in the loading dock out of consideration for our neighbors, not because we want it there. Main parking. The main parking lot has been primarily located within the northern portion of the site. We feel it provides excellent access via the service road, via Stockton Drive, in order to get people on and off Columbia Road into the site and out of the site with minimal impact and minimal circulation using the other roads. As I mentioned before, we do have cross easements. There's no reason those roads can't be used. However, the goal is to have people use the main roads. Turn radius to driveways. As I mentioned before, we've really used smaller radius to try to push people in one direction. Buffers, our landscape architect will talk about the buffers, but that goes part and part with the increased setbacks that we've done to try and keep the site within a core and as close as possible. Grading and drainage, pulling up essentially the grading and drainage plan, which was in the site plan package, C20. It's been colorized to help explain things. The majority of drainage for this site, when it was Honeywell, drained to the south detention basin. About 90% of this site goes to the south basin. About 10% is piped to this north basin. As part of the GDP and subsequent improvements that have already been made, this basin has been improved to accommodate improvements, stormwater from residential, in addition to a non-residential development on lots 4 and 5. Additionally, the south pond has been improved. It's been upgraded to meet DEP standards. An outlet control structure was installed to accommodate residential plus non-residential. Additionally, the pipes leading into the south pond, this light blue area on this side, those pipes were replaced. Those pipes were all designed with an increased size to accommodate drainage from this site. The blue line on the other side of the south pond is an existing drainage pipe. This was replaced and upgraded, increased in size to accommodate drainage from lot 4 and lot 5. Our plan essentially, because of the work that was done already in the pond, because of the pipes that were replaced, we're tying into these existing pipes. That is our plan. What we've done as far as the grading and drainage is we've mimicked existing conditions. We've run, and what I've shown in here in purple is essentially, these are the main drainage lines for our site. We've got one pretty much parallel to Prescott, which will collect Prescott drainage, collects parking lot drainage, building drainage, field drainage, and ties into the existing drainage system before going down the hill. On the other side of the site, again, we've got a main line running that collects building B, C, D, plus fields. This connects to the existing pipe. The drainage line runs down the middle of the site, runs up, and then connects to the existing pipe. The main point in the story here is the basins have been enlarged. All of this prep work has been done to accommodate non-residential development. Same thing goes on with the North Pond. Essentially, we're using the existing drain pipes where possible. We're tying into that. We're using the detention basins, which were designed for this use. Our site really came out to, there's 18 acres of asphalt and buildings. The commercial development in 2015 had roughly 35 acres of asphalt and buildings. We've got a significant reduction in asphalt and buildings on this site. Additionally, we did make modifications to the outlet control structure. Given that we were discharging significantly less runoff and volume to the detention basins, the outlet control structures were modified to further reduce outflow from the site. In the South Pond, which collects the majority of flow, the peak outflow was reduced from the 2015 approved stormwater management report. The peak flow for the 100-year storm was reduced from 120 CFS to 71 CFS. For the 10-year storm, the peak outflow was reduced from 44.77 to 22.45. For the 2-year storm, the peak outflow was reduced from 19.23 CFS to 6.47 CFS. Similar reductions, although not at that scale and magnitude, were done with the North Basin. So there's been modifications to allow additional stormwater detention, taking advantage of the basins themselves. Our stormwater design is compliant with DEP standards. It's compliant with Morris Township standards. Our approach to doing this essentially sought to look at the most conservative solution between what was approved in the 2015 report and what the new regulations required. So when I'm talking about these reductions, our proposed flows were done with the most current stormwater management rules by DEP, which at the time are more stringent than what was done in 2015. So essentially you're getting reductions, major reductions using a more conservative approach to stormwater design in 2022.
Rich, just before we go on to that, are we going to call that Exhibit A8 since that was a colorized copy of the written plan?
Yes.
Matt and I communicated that, but we didn't tell anybody else.
Utilities. So this is Plan C30, the utility plan colorized. Yeah.
Yes. Utility plan, do you have a page number on that or no?
C30.
Okay, thank you.
Sanitary. So as I mentioned earlier, a sanitary pump station was installed as part of some of the infrastructure developments for the GDP. That sanitary pump station included capacity for well over 100,000 gallons per day of commercial development. Our development anticipates an average flow of roughly 30,000 gallons per day. So the existing sanitary pump station has capacity well above and beyond anything we would ever use. Also, similar to the stormwater, a sanitary pipe was installed leading up to the site. So we are running a new sanitary main that loops around the perimeter of the site, but it ties into a manhole located within Lot 5. No disturbance is anticipated within to the existing pipe leading into that pump station. In terms of power, essentially we are planning for a new power to come off of Columbia Road from JCP&L. Power line will be run underground off of Columbia Road, following the yellow line here to what is essentially a small substation located in this area. The substation will then feed the various buildings on site. There's a distribution line located. We've located the distribution line adjacent to Stockton to avoid disturbing it. It'll feed Building A. That substation will feed Building B, Building C, all the buildings, all the lighting on site. Communications, we will be getting a new communications line also that would run parallel to the power line. Verizon has confirmed essentially they have a choice of FiOS or high-speed internet available. There is existing infrastructure. We're working with Verizon to understand how much of that can be used versus how much of that would have to be new. But the site plan right now shows a new duct bank from Columbia Road leading up to the site. Gas, we're expecting a new gas service as well. This would also come off Columbia. A new gas line would be run to a set of meters within the site. This would be located on the wall of building F1, invisible pretty much to everybody driving by on Stockton. Water, we've coordinated with the MUA, and we're planning right now connections in 2 locations. A water connection would be planned off of Columbia Road. The water off of Columbia Road, there would be a fire line and then a domestic line coming off of Columbia Road, feeding primarily the north portion of the site. As part of the infrastructure developments that were done for residential, non-residential, a new 12-inch main was installed along Prescott Road for this essentially the whole development. So a second set of water connections would be done off of Prescott Road, primarily for Building A domestically, in addition to some of the sprinklers. The sprinkler system that waters the fields will be broken up into 2 services, essentially so as not to overburden the system. The water connections have been coordinated with the MUA. The only They do have one comment that that will impact our site plan. They have requested above the ground hot boxes. In a more typical situation, the meter is installed inside the building. In this case, the meters will be installed outside the building near the curb line in an above ground box that will be visible. Those boxes could be anywhere from 6 to 10 foot long, 5 foot wide, and 4 foot high. So those will be visible. We will have those screened as much as possible, but coordination is with the MUA is required. They will tell us where it needs to go. We'll comply with their design intent. The last exhibit, really for civil, is the construction staging. I did want to run through the staging.
When you prepared this exhibit as well?
I did.
Okay.
This is a new.
Let's go construction phasing.
Okay.
810.
So the intent is a three-phase approach for construction. I'll work backwards because it's a little easier to describe. Phase 3, which would be the last piece of construction, which would be contemplated between 2029 to 2031, would be the Field 9 parking lot. The Women's Academy also is part of Phase 3. We have 2 buildings that are designated as Phase 2. Essentially, the indoor field would be part of Phase 2. The dormitory building is also part of Phase 2. The remainder of the site is designated Phase 1. All fields 1 through 8, Building A, Building B, the grounds building, the outbuildings, all of that would be Phase 1. Construction would start pending approvals, likely no earlier than sometime in 2023. Roughly a 2-year duration is expected for Phase 1. Phase 2 would start roughly 6 months after Phase 1 is completed. The intent is to have the fields and main buildings completed so that occupancy can be obtained before that next phase of construction is contemplated. A few other notes on the phasing. These Phase 3 areas, there is Phase 1 work in them. The intent is really because there's a significant amount of earthwork required to level the site and get things ready. There will be grading in these different, what we're calling Phase 3 areas. So for example, this area, the Field 9 area, we're calling it Phase 3 field and parking lot, but under Phase 1, there would be some site work and prep work. For example, there's a drainage pipe that needs to be relocated. So that's something likely we would undertake in Phase 1. Rough grading of the site, that's an activity we would likely do during Phase 1. The final surface for this area during Phase 1 would be essentially seeded and restored to be stabilized. Again, this is an area where we have an environmental cap, so we would have to be conscientious of how that work is done. So any impact to earthwork would have to put a cap back. The other area, the women's wing, which is designated for full build out, there is a small parking lot that's contemplated under Phase 1. So under Phase 1, this area would be a parking lot that's within the drawings as well. A few other things about staging just to note. We've made a commitment that all construction traffic will use the service road. Okay. To do that, the entire site will be fenced in. So there will be temporary construction fencing that encircles the service road on the entire perimeter, running up along Prescott, along Stockton, crossing this area, and then through essentially the wooded area within the front setback. So there would be temporary fencing enclosing the entire construction site. There would be work outside these areas. I don't want to give the impression that once you're in the work zone, you're never there. Landscaping for work along the perimeter more than likely would require some access to Prescott Road. There's utility work also for water within Prescott Road. There's a new hydrant also within Prescott Road. So there is some utility work, some drainage work that would require work adjacent to or in Prescott. That work would be coordinated with the Columbia Park Owners Association, and we would be providing maintenance and protection of traffic as needed for that. The durations, as I said, Nick mentioned we have county site plan approval. So start of construction would be upon receipt of approvals roughly in 2023. The phasing process, just understand that we're subject to supply chain issues, inflation issues. So while we've done our best to estimate how and when we want to do things, it's possible that those durations could change. It's also possible the stop and start lead and lag time of things could be altered based on market conditions. That's all I have.
Yeah, I have no further questions. I think that we had 2 TCC memos, we had an environmental commission memo, and we had 2 memos from the fire official. And Rich's presentation was drafted in a way to try to address all those questions. So I have no further questions for Rich.
Counselor, if we chose to have someone from the environmental committee come to our next hearing, maybe help us understand their memo, would Mr. Barrington be available to testify?
Yes, he's always available, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open up questions from the board at this point. I'm going to go to the opposite side. We started with Ms. Van Order earlier. We'll start with Mr. Quillen. Mr. Quillen?
Mr. Quillen, we're going to start with you for questions.
Okay, thank you. First of all, Mr. Barrington, thank you for your very clear presentation. I appreciated it. I did have a couple of questions about some of the things you said, particularly early on. The steep slope that is on the southwestern part of the property near the residential area. You said that there was going to be some steep slope disturbance there, but then I believe you also said that that was an area that had been used to take some contaminated soils from residential areas to the east and dump them over there. I'm not expressing it quite the way I think you did, but am I repeating it somewhat accurately?
Sort of.
Okay, so is there, first of all, is there some contamination there in that steep area?
No. So the red square that's outlined, it's not a square, it's a strange shape, but there is a red dashed line, if you can see it, that is the Schmoot environmental.
Sorry, that's my dog. I'm going to mute myself as much as I can.
He's got questions. Yeah, so this is the red line pretty much shows the area of contamination. It does not extend to the west of the service road.
And and show Mr. Quillen the slope area that you were referring to, because that's not the same area.
Yeah, the western slope is essentially this blue zone here that's between the service road and the base of slope.
And I think what you said, Mr. Barrington, is that when they were doing some construction, they piled some dirt there, and that's why there's some slope.
Not this one. That's the other area.
Okay.
This is the other.
No, I meant not contamination, but I thought that they left some that you wanted to now that we're going to do landscaping on.
Yeah, the slope here, the western slope it's a 2-on-1 slope. In some areas, it looks like it's eroded due to lack of maintenance or improper vegetation. So we've re-landscaped this entire slope. It's a combination of different seeding, bushes, trees. So we've stabilized it as best we could. We've added a drainage system on the upper side to help it stay stable. So it's been a combination of the drainage work, the planting work to do that. However, nonetheless, it's still an impact to the slope. We're not changing the grade of anything out here, but we're still going in there and impacting it.
So that counts as a
Right.
steep slope disturbance if you go in and you plant some trees on a steep slope. Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then I wanted to ask a question about the access to the main parking lot from the service road, because I couldn't quite see that. I see the access from Stockton, but I don't see it from the service road. But there is a driveway there that leads from the service road into that main parking lot?
There is. So essentially the existing service road, you'd come up, you'd go through the guard post area, and then you have the ability essentially to turn into the main parking lot. So your route, you could come in, circle in. At this point, you could come back out to Columbia, or you could circle through the parking lot and then exit back out to the service road. There is the plans also have, there is we call them barrier arms, but the best way to probably describe them is it's more like a parking garage arm. The set of arms is essentially located right at this point, because as we mentioned before, this is private parking. We don't want people back to grounds. So really these arms would be closed for most of the time to help the majority of people, which is the academy, clinics, camps. They would come in and take this circular route into the facility.
But those arms you referred to would go across the service road just after the driveway?
Correct. There's a few sets. There's one here. There's also one further back here because we don't want the women's team going on the service road. The service road itself, and this is probably a really good note, from this location all the way around to the road here, this portion of the service road is solely for grounds and operations. This is not for the pro team, not for the women's team, not for the academy parents. It's solely for the maintenance staff to really get around from the site. It'll also be used for emergency personnel if and when needed as well. That was one of the comments that we received, just making sure that we did have proper access in and around the facility. But just understand that this portion of the road it's emergency personnel and grounds and operations staff.
Okay, and then another question that I had was about when you outlined the outer perimeter of the property of these two lots 4 and 5. You referred to a kind of a jog in the line where you said that there was a portion that was part of the land that had been ceded to the township. And I think your cursor is more or less there now. Yes.
Yes.
And I wanted to say I walked that area a few months ago. I walked along the residential property and then up the hill a bit and tried to figure out what was down in there. And it seems that there's something sort of like a stream that has been dammed up. There was a chain link fence that was partially submerged and some stagnant water. Now I know this is not part of the subject property anymore, but I just wondered if you know anything about why that got flooded and whether there's anything that the township could do about that.
So I'll tell you what I do know, and I don't know if this will answer the question, but there are 2 isolated wetland pockets on the north side. They're not quite within here, but those have been wetlands for a very long time, been delineated. Those have been there. There's also another wetlands, and this one's a little different, that's further down adjacent to the townhomes. There's also what looks to be wetlands down there. I'm not quite as familiar with that. That's off property. And I don't know the history of it, but it does seem like that water feature does serve some type of function to school drainage. I can say that for the most part, our drainage is meant to be interior and piped towards the detention basin. So we're not relying on piping water into this wetland feature or any of these isolated wetlands.
George, Jim Slade here. I can say that area was addressed recently by Hovnanian. They added some drainage. There was some clogged drainage there, but that was drained probably about a month ago.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you, Jim. Okay, those were all my questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, Counselor, we're going to stop there because we're at 10:15. We've got a little housekeeping because I think you've asked for a special meeting, so we need to find out when we're going to adjourn this to. I'm going to ask all the board members, please write down your questions. I'm going to ask you, Counselor, when you come back, can you give us a quick 10-minute recap so that we could all be remembered as to where we were? Because we often find that we lose that. I think that would be very helpful for us.
Yes.
And then all the board members will be able to ask their questions. We'll move on to our professionals and then the public. I apologize to everybody that stayed here late, that we didn't get further along in the application. As you can see, this is a monumental project. Excuse me. And you're all obviously deeply care about where it's going and what's going to happen with it. So we want to give you as much time as possible. We also want to be fair to the applicant and the other board members. We do have a few other housekeeping items that we have to take care of tonight. And we try to end by 10 because we've moved these meetings from 7:30 to 7 o'clock. And it's not fair to the board members to have to stay much more than 3 hours. So for those reasons, Counselor, we're going to turn this meeting over to Sonia for a second so that she could tell us where we're at with the adjourning to the next hearing.
Mr. Ratzioppi, at the last meeting, you requested a special meeting.
Yes.
I called the board, and the best
Sonia,
day
do you have a mic nearby?
will be Wednesday, September the 28th.
That's good for us.
That's good for you?
Yes.
September the 28th.
Yeah, I will not be here.
Sorry?
I have 3 meetings the same night.
Wednesday, September 28th.
Sonia, I think it would be helpful so the public knows that a special meeting means it's entirely devoted to this application, so they don't have to wait for something before us, just so the people know.
That is correct, Mr. Ratzioppi.
Thank you.
Special meeting means that the applicant is the only one that will be heard that night. So the entire night will be dedicated to the Red Bulls on September the 28th. The meeting will start at 7 p.m. It will go till 10 o'clock, just for the Red Bulls, okay?
So, Mr. Ratzioppi, I expect that the next hearing, Mr. Barrington will get questioned. You'll bring on your lighting expert, because I think there's a lot of questions about the lighting expert.
Yes.
And Sonia, can you invite Mr. Morgan or someone from his committee, the Environmental Commission, to come to the meeting? I'm sure the board has questions about his report. I know there was a lot of interest in the lighting. I think it'd be really helpful to all of us to have him at the next meeting so that he could help us steer through some of his recommendations. Would that be helpful to the rest of the board?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, because we want to make sure the public's properly apprised, just to confirm, this application will be continued until September 28th, 7 o'clock. It'll be here in this room.
Yes.
All correct?
Yes.
So this is their notice. And in addition, I would just ask, I'm not sure where we are with time of decision, but that the applicant would consent to any time of decision extensions until after the meeting.
Of course.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to Mr. Slate. You had some.
Yeah, so an issue came up with the the pylon sign at the Mars Marketplace site at the corner of Martin Luther King Avenue and Columbia Road. And the board originally approved.
Excuse me, if everyone wouldn't mind when you leave in silence. We're still in an open hearing. Thank you.
So the board approved a large monument sign. And, I'm going to ask Mike's running the Zoom in the other room. But Mike, under the planning board, Mars Marketplace pillar sign, or I think it was under, it wasn't pillar, it's a different word. I'm drawing a blank on it. But there was the approved sign. If you're able to call that up so the board members can see that screen. And Mike, if you're able to zoom, thank you. So and maybe you can zoom in on that upper right.
Can we just make sure that Mr.
Corner.
Quillen's still out there? Mr. Quillen, are you still out there?
So here, I can't see the screen that's being referred to though.
Okay, we'll try to fix that.
Mike, you might need to double click on it so it'll come in as an exhibit for anyone to see, or at least George to see as a member who's not present. And if not, we'll have to work without George on that. So in the upper right of this sheet, that was the layout of on the architectural plans, you'll see, this is what was approved on one of the more recent, and it may have been part of the generator plan where they came in for an amended site plan that included the generator for the Liddell building. This essentially was the sign that was approved previously. And I took that to mean that there was going to be, two large signs on top where it's shown as the Liddell on the top, and then, another larger tenant sign, and that there would be 6 other tenants, on that sign, knowing that there would be multiple tenants on the site, and this, as part of this particular amended site plan, there was also an amendment, I guess the timing wise would have had been prior to this, to the redevelopment plan that allowed for or specifically discussed, multiple tenants and the tenant areas to be kind of split up as necessary. And as you can see, I'll say in the left-hand side of that exhibit that's up, you see tenant spaces in that building where some, and I can't see the widths, but I don't know if it really varies, but you can see that some are narrower and some are wider. And it was basically based upon the user. If you had a certain type of use that needed, let's say 2,500 square feet, the space would be, maybe 50 feet wide. But if it was a user that needed less space, it may be 20 feet wide. So they wanted to have that flexibility in order to, have more or less tenants based upon the type of tenant and the use and the space that the tenant needed. And that was another part, not a major part, but that was something that was part of that redevelopment plan amendment and that amended site plan. And the tenant or the owner or the developer took that as the ability to also add tenants on the sign, as much as the sign did not reflect that. And it was his take on it that the tenant didn't necessarily mean one tenant in each one of those 6 spots below, that it may mean essentially multi-tenants that could go in there. You do get to a point though where you jam 5 or 6 tenants on that small area and one of those 6 boxes, and if you're driving by on Columbia Road, I think you're not even going to see it. You may recognize a like a certain brand or a symbol or a color of something, that, hey, that's a Starbucks. I realize that's a Starbucks symbol, that sort of thing.
Mr. Slate, you mean Hanover, right?
I'm sorry, Hanover. I said Columbia. Excuse me, Hanover. Mixing up sites here. I'm stuck on Red Bulls. So, Mike, if you can go to, there's 2 other exhibits. If you can call up one or the other, and then I'll explain them to the board. So what the developer came back to us with for an approved sign was, and I think it was this is essentially what, he thought that, he could do, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is, I believe this is the one we'll see when we do the other one. But this is the sign. The anchor tenants being Burlington and Liddell, and then the other tenants that are filling in essentially those other tenant spaces. Again, based upon the language in the redevelopment plan and that resolution of approval, it did talk about the ability for multiple tenants, as much as that sign did not reflect that. But I still felt this was an overcrowding of the sign and not really the intent of the board. He did the developer did mention that their leases that they did sign, and I think they signed 22 leases that essentially said that the signage, the pylon sign would contain their name. So, yeah, obviously that's a little problematic, but
Mr.
I mean-
Slate, this is a quick question, just for our edification. So this is the pylon sign that sits on Hanover. And the applicant is asking to list each one of his tenants on the pylon sign. And in addition to that, they each have a sign on the building.
Correct.
Okay.
And again, I said, this is a no-go. There's too many, and this is, my thought was the sign that the board approved was the 2 anchor tenants and 6 other tenants. Although I will say it's my understanding, and I did not review that in detail. Maybe Steve did look at that, but it was my understanding that the resolution and the amended redevelopment plan did allow for more tenants on the sign, as much as that sign detail did not reflect it. So I said, I'm okay, but I said, I still want to bounce this off the board. It was, essentially that it was my opinion, and I believe Paul was kind of on the same page, that, an amended site plan would be required if if he wanted to go down this road, because it was still my opinion that that's not what was conveyed to the board. So, Mike, if you can go to the other exhibit, I mean, this is kind of a compromise that, I'm not comfortable making the decision myself. I wanted to bring it to the board, essentially informally, what we're doing right now.
We're going to get you a decision before you leave tonight.
Thank you. That's the goal here. So, Mike, if you can zoom in on that sign, so this is obviously a lot less cluttered. These are the tenants that I believe have signed a lease with the intention that their name was going to go on the pylon sign. It's still cluttered, but not as cluttered. I feel this is a compromise that, works. I think there's, some semantics or things that they can argue going, again, I'll go back to that resolution of approval, the last amended site plan, and the changes to the redevelopment plan. But before I said okay on this, I just wanted to make sure, I wanted to get the board's feedback because
So
I
can
was
you give
kind
us
of
what the
interpreting
2,
something.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. What are the 2 options that are before us so that we could get a motion a second and
This one,
move on?
this one, or the one with 6 individual panels with the 2 anchor tenants.
Okay, I'll open it up for the board.
The super busy one is not on the table.
Correct. That's a no-go.
So open it up to the board for a quick decision one way or the other, and we'll see what the polling is so that we could give our distinguished engineer guidance.
I like this better, but I question if you can see it from, is it big enough to read?
Kathy, when you say better, you're comparing it to the one.
To the ultra cluttered one.
No.
Well, that was
off
not
the table.
even in consideration.
That one's not in consideration.
Yeah, it's this one or the
the other
12, I guess.
Yeah.
The
Well, I mean, he
6,
thinks,
7,
he thinks he's entitled to the cluttered one. And I said, if you're going to go to the cluttered one, you're going back to the board.
So that's where we're at. If he wants the
this-
cluttered
this
one, he
board
has to come before us. If not, we could give him relief.
That's my take.
We can give him relief for this one.
So
Well, I think that the board does, the way the resolution was written, he does have the flexibility to do this, kind of in a gray area.
And how is this one I mean,
it has fewer names on it is all.
Well, I think it's in
how
order.
does this one conform better? I'm just, I'm
just
trying
not as
to
busy.
figure that out.
Not as busy.
The first one had 2 large tenant spaces and then 6 smaller ones, as I recall. This one has 1 large tenant space across, and then it has one that's more vertical, and then he has multiple names in the remaining 5.
They're linear as opposed to, I'm going to say the other one's more geometric.
One's horizontal and one's vertical with the 2 major tenants, and then there's 4 in each other, 4 or 5 in each.
And he argued that it's tenant, but it was tenants. I said, well, it says tenant, it doesn't say tenants. You know, there's,
So I have a question regarding that marketplace. It's an extended marketplace. It stretches along Hanover for quite a distance. And, you know, if I were signing a lease there, I would want my name visible from the street. So what we've done is approve a signage limitation, basically, that says only certain tenants can get their name on the street, and everybody else has to take their chances with someone understanding where their business is once they get into the shopping center itself. My thought is, in the interest of people trying to find things, that we ought to be able to provide more visibility to whoever is going into the marketplace and knows what's there. I think this drove, we drove this situation because of our signage limitation.
So Linda,
But that whole area, it's a very long frontage along Hanover.
what are you suggesting, that this is acceptable, or you want to go back to the other one?
No, I'm saying neither. I'm saying the original sign had 2 major tenants and 6 smaller spaces. But even with that, the extended length of the marketplace along Hanover would say you're going to have some tenants up here and some tenants down there. And how does a person driving understand which entrance to go into and where the business is that I'm looking for? We're creating a problem. And I understand where the owner is going, because he's saying, I have these people who want to be in this marketplace, and it's a very attractive and highly visible place to shop, but people don't know where the businesses are.
But it's not uncommon in an upscale strip center to have a monument, and only certain tenants are on the monument based upon their size. And I think that's probably the direction that the original sign goes in. This takes it to a level where every tenant gets their name on there, but you've cleaned it up so that it's not haphazard.
This is not every tenant.
It's not everyone.
I'm going to say
that's still not
there's
everyone.
going to be 30 tenants.
Got it.
You know, and we're at 22
So-
there.
So my question is, at one end of marketplace, there's company ABC, and the other end of marketplace, it's XYZ.
Let them split it.
And how do you know which end of the marketplace I have to enter as a shopper?
No, it makes more sense. Split it. The people that are
Why
over
not
here
have
be on
more-
this pylon. The people
Why
that are over
not?
there be on that pylon.
Why not, as a planning board, use some common sense and let this guy show people where his tenants are?
I mean, but
That means more signs.
But the over-cluttered version, I don't think was accomplishing that anyway.
No, I wasn't either, but that was all he could do because we forced the limitation.
No, we didn't force the limitation.
What?
We approved what he presented.
Well, but he thought he,
I think the redevelopment plan did kind of pin down the pylon
Anticipate
sign and
something.
But I mean, each frontage is going to have,
Yes, gigantic sign on each store.
you know, a little bird behind me said there could be up to 40 tenants. So you're not going to get 40 tenants, you know, on the sign.
not on
obviously.
one pylon sign,
No.
for sure.
No.
But because of the extensive frontage of the marketplace along Hanover, and we have multiple entrances into the shopping center, you know, isn't there something that we can do from a common sense standpoint that, because I'm not just talking about the business owner, I'm talking about people who want to shop there. If they go in one end of the marketplace, then they have to drive through the whole thing to figure out where their shop is that they're trying to get to.
I think there's going to be a learning curve.
There's
on that.
2
It's
pylon signs?
unavoidable. One pylon sign
One pylon sign for the whole mall.
for the whole frontage.
Which is located kind of directly opposite the
Up-
main entrance, directly opposite the shop.
Opposite
More
ShopRite,
towards
yeah.
the-
It's pretty close to
It's
ShopRite.
probably a third, yeah, like opposite ShopRite, but it's more on the Martin Luther King third of the
We
site.
could probably wordsmith this and think about it for a half hour. So just maybe go right down the line. George, you have any comment?
Do I have any comment?
What's that?
You talking to me? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Okay. well, it was a little hard for me to follow the visuals. I think that it's going to be tough to put every tenant on the signs along the street. That's what it sounds like. How many tenants are we talking about?
Let's say 40. Let's say 40 or
So
50.
that sounds impossible. I mean, if you had two big signs with 20 tenants on each, you wouldn't be able to read those signs either. So I would say you just can't do it.
Well,
You can only
I
put
don't
up the
believe
major ones.
that proposal's not on the table right now, right? We're not voting for that. We're choosing between the original, well, kind of the original, the 8-panel and the compromise that's on the screen now with the 22.
I think
That's what's on the table.
just to clarify, what's on the table is to tell the tenant that if he doesn't like the sign that he got approved, he's more than welcome to come back to us for a site plan application amendment for a sign. However, Jim is floating something out there that could be in the middle. And I'm hearing what Linda's saying is that maybe we could put something here together that you're allowed 12 of your biggest tenants on the sign. I don't think we're going to come up with a compromise. It can't be 50, it can't be 30. So I think the answer is do we ask him to come back to the planning board and present, and we give him a site plan application for an amended site plan based on the sign? That's the way I see it. So
Isn't Linda, aren't you proposing something different? You're
I'm
proposing more signs.
I'm proposing, because of the frontage along Hanover and the fact that there's multiple entrances into the marketplace, that we could be helpful in allowing more guidance to shoppers. That's all I'm saying. And it's outside the norm for sure. It's not something that we're forced to do. That's not something necessarily asked for. But in my way of thinking, a little bit of common sense applied here would say, realistically, people don't know how to get to the business they want to get to.
So you would have a sign perhaps at each entrance with the
That-
tenants
that-
that you would access
Well,
there?
maybe. I mean, I forget off the top of my head how many entrances there actually are, but there's several, and they extend a long ways along Hanover. So you have one sign that is very limiting, and it's at the 1/3 of the shopping center, and you have 2/3 of the shopping center with no guidance for shoppers,
So it sounds like you're advocating he comes back for an amended site plan application.
or that we
Well, because we
propose
can't
something.
grant him more signs without him coming back and asking for them and
Right,
showing
but
us what they
maybe,
look like.
maybe we think outside the box a little bit and be willing to accept a proposal that's a little bit unique. This is a unique shopping
No,
center,
but neither case, he's got to come back and present it.
perhaps, yeah, perhaps.
So
That's not a perhaps. I mean, what you're saying
It's
is
one way or the other.
multiple signs, variances, possible
Yeah, he's gotta
change to
come
the
back.
redevelopment plan.
So we have no other shopping center in Morris Township that looks like the marketplace. And we have no other shopping center in the local area that has that extended frontage.
Yeah, but Linda, nobody
So-
here is saying that we wouldn't grant him that approval. We're just saying it's, he's going to have to come back.
Well, he may come back if he knows he'll have a willing, supportive board.
Well, I can't speak for whether we're
I
willing
can't
or
speak
not
for
until
everyone
he's
either.
here,
I'm
but-
just throwing it out as an
but no,
idea.
it's a very good suggestion, Mr. Bai. Anything on?
Yeah, I can agree. I mean, sign was originally proposed, a really busy one. This is only marginally better, and I'm not sure it solves all the problems.
I don't think it solves any problem. Because
No,
you
well,
still-
this solves his problem right now. He really doesn't want to come back for amended site plan. I mean, he's hoping to start opening in the next couple months. If he has to come back for an amended site plan,
Well,
it's going to take
perhaps-
more than a couple months.
Perhaps we could
to
agree
address
to an
that.
interim solution that looks like this and encourage the business owner to contemplate thinking outside the box with us.
That'd be okay with me. I could accept this as is.
Yes, and fair, because we don't want to be sued.
Yeah.
Is that what's being proposed here satisfies the concerns of the developer and also would allow the board to take a quick vote tonight to authorize your professionals to consider it as a field change and not necessarily requiring them
Right.
to come back. Now, should the practical realities necessitate that, oh, well, all of our tenants want an additional space, well, they could always come back to the board in the future. But what's being proposed here is just an interim to use your word, an interim solution, then should they want to come back and maybe they want a second sign in a year from now or 2 years, that would be within the jurisdiction of the board, but we couldn't do anything to reopen the process because a second sign could require variance.
I understand, and it certainly would, yeah.
So
But I-
that sounds like a great solution. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'd like to
move
make a
that way?
motion.
Would anyone like to second?
I'll second.
Okay.
I want to know, is this exactly what the sign would look like that you're proposing? Or
Yes.
this is a sample? So, I mean,
That's
is this
better than, that's
content?
better than the one that had 7.
That's it.
Yeah.
And how big, like you can see it when you're driving, you can read it?
He signed, these are national tenants.
They're
I
going to
don't
go
care
by
if
their
you can
logos.
see it or not, in their leases, they
Full
say
logos.
you're required to put it on the pylon.
Yep.
He signed those leases.
He's
He's in trouble if he doesn't get this interim.
He'll
solution.
lose his lease,
He
basically.
loses his lease, and it's very hard to get retail tenants these days. Really, really hard.
And then maybe we can contemplate
Of course.
a future Plan B that is creative. Let me use the right word.
We've got a motion, a second. Is there any other discussion besides what Ms. Wilson just said?
I have one other question. When are we gonna get or when will we know who all the tenants are? There's a lot of vacancies still,
If you
right?
could read those tiny names. Are those them?
I mean, there's more than
These are
this.
ones that have signed leases.
Correct.
With that, yeah. So
These are tenants that are signed.
I think this is a compromise, as everyone's suggesting. This lets him move forward with his project. If he wants to come back subsequent to this, he's more than willing to submit a site plan application. And as Ms. Murphy said, maybe he needs 3 signs. That's variances. That's something that we need to discuss and look at as a planning board to decide whether or not we want to move that forward.
And there were some other triggers that I seem to recall are in the resolution of approval that talked about traffic and looking and how things are functioning. So maybe it ties in with that if there's something.
So
some
we
other
just,
issue.
we just do a post-opening evaluation, and we find out that, 90% of the traffic goes in the wrong entrances, drives all the way through the marketplace to try to figure out where the hell they're going. So,
Or he feels he needs.
or he feels he needs it,
He needs another sign to
Second
get
sign.
more tenants.
So we're going to call for a vote. Sonia, I'll ask you to do it as a roll call vote so that it's in the minutes that way. Yes.
I don't remember a second.
Oh, did not get a second? I thought we did.
I thought we did too.
I thought
You
I
did.
thought Mr.
I
Bai
think I
seconded.
seconded it.
Yes, Mr. Bai seconded. it. Yes.
It's
I
not
thought,
even
I thought,
midnight
the, I
yet.
thought the second came from this
I'm
side.
sorry.
No, yeah, it was him, not me.
So just to be clear what the motion is, the motion is that we're allowing this sign. And we as a board are allowing our professionals to do it administratively as opposed to him to have to come back to the planning board.
Right.
So the planning board is not approving a site plan application. We're approving the right for our professionals to make a field change.
Yes,
You're making a vote to guide your profession.
Thank you.
yes.
You just have to keep us appeal proof.
it was.
It was.
Want me to make a motion?
Please.
Please.
Okay. Mr. Quillen,
Yes.
Ms. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Vine,
Yes.
Wilson,
Yes.
Ms. Van Order,
Yes.
Mr. Flowers,
Yes.
Mr. Alonso.
I did want to say yes tonight, so yes.
He said yes.
Thank you, that is helpful. What do you guys have on?
Before we close here, we do have one other item that we need to attend to. I don't know if anybody's here, but if you'd like to make a public comment, please do.
Thank you. My name is Alan McAlpin, 5 Armstrong Road. I have prepared remarks that go to the question, does the township judicial process for land use application provide a level playing field for objectors? And I can pass these out if you think that'd be helpful, or I'll just launch.
No, we'd love to have you pass it out. We could follow along with you if you would.
Okay.
Except I really can't.
Poor
The
George.
the only
can't
problem
get
is
his
you do have
copy.
one board member who is viewing this virtually. So,
That works very nicely into my presentation.
oh, great.
I think Mr. McAlpin has a view and he can maybe summarize it.
Does the township judicial process for land use application provide a level playing field for objectors? The question is inspired by 4 elements. While the 10-day notice for those within 200 feet of the application has been elevated to notice on the township website, it usually is posted midweek prior to the first hearing of the following Sunday. We are very grateful to Ms. Wilson, Ms. Santiago, and others for the notice posted there. The timing, however, usually allows just 4 days, 2 of which are weekend days for objectors groups to meet, make decisions, organize, raise money, hire professional representation. It is worth noting the applicant has been preparing out of public view for months. Accordingly, how is this notice barely sufficient? 2, the applicant's presentation on traffic impact is not practical. The report is routinely rubber stamped by the Department of Transportation, it appears. When was the last time the report was not approved? There is no member of the public that is not actively aware of the massive traffic problems in New Jersey. The traffic impact study, conspicuous in its omissions, is an insult to the intelligence of our residents. We can do the math. Accordingly, how does the traffic impact study not take the integrity of the process as well as not raise questions as to fairness? 3, unless public health officials dictate otherwise, the requirement residents must to attend in-person planning board and board of adjustment hearings in order to display their position or participate in matters that affect them is unacceptable in a digital world, providing attractive and reliable alternatives. Needless to say, reliable can be achieved with a quality system. This requirement is a horse and wagon law in an EV age. Has this antediluvian law no sunset? Has anyone contemplated the equity issue for housebound, elderly, infirm, those who are unable to drive, and the parent without childcare? Are these to be denied their right to participate here? Separately or somewhat separately, legal counsels are often stacked up at the high cost per hour before they can earn their fees. Long drawn out hearing sessions for too many applicants at each provide participants and their counsel too little time devoted to their own interests that evening. What are the all-in costs, including environmental costs, of unnecessarily dragging too many residents to township hearings 3 times a month? In my almost 10-year experience, I am proud of our resident objectors. They have managed to direct their anger, frustration, and disappointment into a determined and constructive resolve. On one hand, objectors are encouraged to participate responsibly with our government, yet that participation now seems to lack the evenness that is customary in our society. Finally, and I mean to make this very clear, it is not our position that participating attendance should be an either-or proposition, either virtual or in person, but rather provides choices for all the time when allowed by public officials. That is to say, the hybrid model. Very glad to see Mr. Quillen tonight making use of that technology. And lastly, I am from Morris Township. Show me an even playing field here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And I don't know that we're going to be able to comment on it, other than I'll let Ms. Wilson give you at least a brief. I think it's important that you know that your township council is working with the state to make some changes. These are not changes that we at this planning board can do for you, other than listen. But Ms. Wilson?
We are, as you know, we are working to get the 10-day notice changed to 21 days, and that requires amending MLUL. And we have gone through the League of Municipalities, submitting the resolution. It's been approved by them. They've pushed it to the state legislature. We're now hooking up with bipartisan support. I believe there is a bill in writing that now has bipartisan support, and it's working its way through both the Senate and the Assembly. Is that correct, Mr. Quinn?
Yes, it is. Senator Lugo and Senator Klein have sponsored the bill.
So there's progress there. That will be huge if we can do that, because then people will at least get the letter before a few days before the meeting. I mean, that would help. That's one point on here that would really help.
Right. You'll notice at the bottom, I said, if asked, there's some solutions or interim solutions, which may include other alternatives. I think what we're looking at here is we got old laws. And I understand what you're going through, but we can't be handcuffed by the past when we have so much technology that requires so much change and allows so much more to happen. And the laws have just got to catch up with the technology. And I appreciate everything that Ms. Wilson and others are doing in that regard. And you might have mentioned there's other issues here other than just that one. And I would hope that in time, at least, by bringing this to your attention, it gets resolved one way or another. There are people more creative than I am, but I have jotted a couple of solutions down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We're guided by your wisdom tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public? No, seeing none. Do we have any other business legislative update? Maybe we could postpone that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We can catch that next time around?
Yes, no.
Okay.
No legislation report right now.
We get a motion to close?
I so moved.
I'll second.
Hand vote? Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.